The Gay for May video review program Late Night Marathon starts right now.
What?
Beginning with the premiere of a brand new episode.
If there's one thing you can always trust Hasbro to do, it's glazing their G1 characters. Absolutely unapologetically hosing them down with thick, creamy seamies. Legacy Sandstorm is perhaps one of the greatest glazings Hasbro has ever given to a G1 character, but he's got one annoying problem keeping him from being the cream of the crop. Welcome back to the show, it's Gay for May. Legacy Sandstorm is a hard R remake of his classic G1 toy, one of the original triple changers designed by Hasbro in 1986. The character debuted in the Season 3 episode Fight or Flee, where his home planet, Paradron, with its vast resources of Energon and sexy RC clones, gets invaded by the Decepticons. And then the Autobots fucking blow it up for like no reason.
I've never seen anything this beautiful in the entire galaxy. All right, give me the bomb.
Oh, but Gay for May, in the original script, it says that the Decepticons turn the planet into a giant weapon.
I'm gonna show you my fucking giant weapon. How about that? How you feel about that, huh? How you feel about that? But after that, he starts up a bromance with Octane of all people. And they hit it off really well, actually, since they're both triple changers, you know? They both like to change it up. If you're picking up what I'm putting down. What? That's gay! I can't believe Transformers has gone woke now. All right, that's it. I'm going back to sleep. Sandstorm's first vehicle mode is a bulky black and tangerine colored helicopter. At first glance, you could barely even tell that this is a triple changer. Nearly every part of the buggy mode is encased within the helicopter, aside from the wheels that are poking out from underneath. But many helicopters actually do have wheels, so they're not entirely out of place, and they're functional in this mode too. This vehicle has had an interesting history in this franchise. It's not as explicit with Legacy Sandstorm, but G1 Sandstorm's helicopter mode was primarily based off the Sikorsky Sea Stallion, a heavy lift cargo copter that was deployed by everyone's favorite crayon gobblers, the US Marine Corps. The Sea Stallion was later developed into the Pavlo and the Super Stallion, which became Movie Blackout and Grindor's alternate modes respectively. Both rotors spin, obviously, but the main gimmick of this mode is this cage and winch that attach to the underside of the vehicle. You could turn the orange gears to raise and lower the string, but the cage seems a little small to actually be useful for anything. I guess you could put some tiny women in it. Tiny women! Still, it's an ingenious inclusion, as it emphasizes the cargo hauling capabilities of the vehicle Sandstorm is ostensibly based off of, while expanding upon what the original toy offered. There's something to be said about new accessories that feel deliberately tailored to the figure, as opposed to something like awkwardly slapping a pair of SpongeBob karate gloves onto a tank or a jet because somebody felt insecure about their price point. Next, we have Sandstorm's second vehicle mode, a beefy armored dune buggy. He's long and sleek with big thick treads on his tires and a massive engine block in the back. He's more of the off-road racing variety of dune buggy, not the recreational kind, like the one Drake and Josh got from that crackhead the one time. I wonder what that guy's been up to lately. Oh my fucking god. The buggy has some great rolling ability thanks to these pinned wheels and rubber tires, a little detail he actually shares with another Legacy figure, fellow dune buggy Beachcomber. Once again, Hasbro out here for real giving these random ass G1 characters that Chinese censorship treatment. I can't even remember the last time Optimus had rubber tires. All of Sandstorm's accessories can fit comfortably onto this vehicle. He comes with 2 blasters, but we'll talk more about them later. But for now, we'll just shove this into whichever random hole will accept it. Yeah, that sounds a lot like my dating life. But the cage and winch get incorporated into the buggy much more intimately. The assembly breaks apart, and each piece has a dedicated spot on the vehicle. The bottom of the cage becomes a skid plate behind the front wheels. The winch plugs into the back of the engine, and the cage itself goes over top. It's such a creative usage of these pieces, and their integration into the buggy seems so natural, much like how they were used in the helicopter mode. Plus, despite being brand new additions to the character, they actually help to bring the vehicle closer to its appearance in the G1 cartoon than even the original toy. The way that these vehicle modes feel so distinct and independent from each other is the second most impressive feat I've seen this week, after my sister's. Like I mentioned before, the engineering of this figure is nearly identical to G1 Sandstorm's, merely adding a few extra steps to make it more sophisticated, which goes to show how efficient that original figure's design was to begin with. Now, in robot mode, Sandstorm is one of the most aesthetically interesting Legacy figures we've seen. He has these long and lanky limbs, and the overall sculpting has a smoothness to it that seems somewhat uncharacteristic of Legacy. These aesthetics and proportions really give the robot mode this G1 animation style quality, which is something usually reserved for Takara's masterpiece figures. Masterpiece, more like masterpiece of dog shit. So going with the toy-inspired head kind of robbed him of that cartoon aesthetic synergy. It's still a nice, clean head sculpt, and I think it's really funny that he looks like he's wearing a toupee. Plus, there's a non-0% chance that Hasbro will reissue this guy with an animation-accurate head eventually. So honestly, a mismatch of these design elements is the least of this figure's worries. As I mentioned before, Sandstorm has two main weapons. The Sandblaster gun is a generic-looking black rifle that's directly based off of his toy weapon. It has a Mobile Suit Gundam kind of vibe to it that I like though. And his second blaster is this small gray one that's meant to be mounted on his arm, to replicate the torch he used to escape from Diddy's house in his debut episode. But in this mode, that cage thing doesn't have a proper place to go like it did in the two vehicle modes. You know, if you're creative enough, you can find some use for them. You know, like using the cage as a flail or shooting some rope all over his boyfriend. But after their inspired inclusion in the two vehicle modes, becoming an afterthought in the robot mode is kind of pathetic. The other thing that really blisters my bunghole about this figure are the loose connections for the chest. This little 5mm peg is too short, and these tabs don't really connect to anything. So no matter how hard I push it together, Sandstorm's chest refuses to stay closed. It especially tends to undo itself when you try to move his arms around while posing him. Far be it from me to complain about somebody's top coming off, but considering how much thought and effort Hasbro put into designing the rest of this figure, despite almost completely recycling the blueprint of its predecessor, it's absolutely baffling to me that such a blatant ass quality control issue managed to slip through the cracks like this. I still think the overwhelming strength of his two vehicle modes is enough to consider Sandstorm the best triple changer we've seen in the last few years, but he was almost the best legacy figure of this year too. Now, if you want to see how to completely fail at being a triple changer, you can check out this review next. But anyway, that's just my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye-bye.
In the 1st century, there lived a Roman poet by the name of Juvenal, who famously penned 16 volumes of satires criticizing Roman life of the day. Nearly 2,000 years later, the words of Juvenal remain ever relevant. Nemo repente, fuit turpissimus. No man becomes evil all at once.
Welcome back to the show, it's Gay for May, and the Rise of Tyranny 2-pack takes us back to the past, where the seeds of conflict were sown. This maniacal multi-pack features a younger, more idealistic Megatron, alongside the corrupt and conniving Senator Ratbat. Minor Megatron is perhaps the unassuming star of this set. Remolded from the original Siege Megatron, he features a newly sculpted head, chest, and shoulders. While the set is overall inspired by the Megatron Origin miniseries from IDW Comics, Minor Megatron himself is more specifically modeled after a later redesign by Alex Milne. But it's easy to see how perfect this mold is for this version of the character. The figure looks nearly one-to-one with the comic art. I don't understand why IDW always gets to have super accurate figures when we can't have a big fat-ass bulkhead, but I digress. Even details like the treads on his back have existed since the original release. And let's not forget the suspiciously similar head found on Generation Select's Combat Megatron. It seems like this version of the character was always in the cards. The simple but phenomenal deco is truly the highlight of the figure in my opinion. The dark grays and silvers remind me of bare unfinished steel. It feels soul-crushingly utilitarian, like a KFC uniform. I think the caution bars are a little on the nose though. It's not quite the same as reflective PPE, but it's certainly more visually striking and gets across the point of express functionality. Perhaps the only representation of Megatron's true individuality comes from this red crest that's sculpted into his helmet. Overall, the deco is kind of depressing in a way, but it perfectly reflects the life of the young Megatron, whose station in life was determined solely by his purpose. Until one day, the government who created this system in the first place sought to outmode the mining class, sparking Megatron's revolt. Megatron may be ruthless, but he started down this path out of concern for his fellow miners. Megatron loves miners. He loves working with miners, he loves talking to miners on the internet, he loves having sex with miners. Shockingly, despite the dirty, exhausting work Megatron does, this version of the figure is much cleaner than the original release. Siege Megatron went for a very G1 look, but had the polarizing deco decision to splash a generous amount of grime and battle damage onto the figure. And to my knowledge, there's never been a strictly clean version of G1 Megatron out of this mold, maybe the closest being the 35th anniversary edition. This sort of grungy treatment wouldn't have been unwelcome on Minor Megatron, but I think I prefer his deco being more basic and plain, giving us the most straightforward version of this design. Complementing Megatron's industrial aesthetics are a new set of accessories. He comes with a humongous drill, one that Megatron uses to reenact his favorite scenes from Gurren Lagann. I know which scenes are my favorite. And he also comes with this cool Energon pickaxe. You can disassemble them both and recombine them into this goofy-ass Power Rangers weapon if you want to. The weapons also play a pivotal role in Megatron Megatron's transformation, parts forming onto the chassis to complete his conversion into a drill tank. It's honestly pretty clever how they managed to keep reinventing this vehicle mode, the craziest of course being Shattered Glass Megatron's jet mode, but it isn't especially accurate to either the vehicle mode seen in Megatron Origin or the later updated design. A few of the mold's old problems still exist too. The neck panel could swing out too far despite having been fixed on the Earthrise version. He doesn't have wrists either, and his hands are stuck at this weird angle. And on top of that, there's a common assembly issue with this figure, where his knees are flipped around, which gives him really unstable posture and can make him kind of prone to falling over. His knees are all wobbly, like he's been mining all day for prostates with his crotch-mounted pickaxe. I can look past these problems for the sake of how cool I think this figure looks, but Jesus Christ, Hasbro, I think it's time to retire this mold.
Another quote from Juvenile comes from his 6th satire, Quis custodiat ipsos custodes. Translated, it means, who guards the guardsman, and has been famously referenced in many pieces of media.
What happened to the American dream? You're looking at it.
The phrase questions how those in positions of power can be held accountable.
And one character who definitely possesses a level of unchecked power is Senator Ratbat. Now, I'm not going to dwell too much on Senator Ratness, as I've previously talked about this mold in my A Hero Is Born review, and my thoughts haven't changed. I really like the black and purple color scheme though, and the retooling on Ratbat is surprisingly as extensive as Alpha Trion. It goes beyond a simple head swap, remolding his chest, shoulders, and parts of the alt mode too. The new head sculpt is pretty good, evoking the bestial qualities of Ratbat's more infamous cassette body. The top of the head slopes forward like a snout, down to this toothed maw that encircles his face. His expression looks very cold and detached, but it always makes me smile because it reminds me of the polite cat meme. They've also molded Ratbat's big gaudy Mr. T necklace onto his torso, the center of which is emblazoned with the symbol of the Cybertronian Senate. By this time in the comics, the Senate had become a bloated, corrupt governing force, with Ratbat easily being one of its most deplorable members. Using his authority, Ratbat manipulated various aspects of the economy and held a vested interest in the automation of the Energon mines. He later financed Megatron's gladiatorial events with weapons, indirectly arming the early Decepticon cause. The big silly backpack is still here, but Ratbat wears a kind of winged cape that fans out, so this could be the most appropriate usage of this kibble yet. I sense a bit of mold degradation though, as the tabs that hold the wings in place feel awfully loose on mine. The wings completely encase the figure when transforming to his hovercraft mode. We've talked about this before. Hovercraft alt modes are like participation trophies for Transformers, but at least he looks distinctly boat-shaped. It's super slick, everything tabs together well, and there's another crisp Senate badge drawing your eye to Ratbat's incredibly well-concealed head. You can slap his blaster on the side of the ship too. The funny part about this set though is that Ratbat never directly interacts with Megatron. He always uses Soundwave as a go-between, so arguably it might have made more sense to include him, or maybe even Sentinel Prime, who Megatron battles at the end of the series. But I think the reason they chose Ratbat was because of how he contrasts Megatron, both in the story and visually. Between his regal color scheme and his highfalutin appearance, Ratbat looks downright bougie next to Megatron, and I believe the most important thing that Ratbat provides to this set is that context.
The life of Megatron is a tragedy. Despite noble intentions, the harshness of the system he sought to change pushed him to adopt violent means, which only reinforced his understanding of its corruption. Like Juvenile says, why must I try? I can't do the right thing. Only God knows what the future may bring. Actually, that may have been Juvenile, the rapper.
This is not a perfect set by any means. The only perfect set that I know of is my sister's. Plus, $70 feels a bit steep for two Voyagers, but it's a set that I find to be unmatched in both aesthetics and storytelling. And for that, I think it's definitely worth checking out. And if you want to see another video where I take on two guys at once, check out last year's A Hero Was Born review. But anyway, that's just my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye-bye. Legacy Cosmos is here, and everyone's going gaga for this little green man. But is he even worth the hype? You gotta watch the video to find out. Welcome back to the show. It's Gray for May. And Cosmos is one of the brand new Legacy Velocitron Speedia 500 figures, a line depicting the titular race and featuring a swath of sleek and stylish competitors, and also this plucky little chunkerton. Cosmos' vehicle mode is a round, saucer-shaped vessel with what looks like a large trash can sticking out of the top of it. He has a two-tone green color scheme and a silver and blue plate adorning the front with a big red nipple on top. Yes, he is supposed to be a UFO, one of the extraterrestrial variety. There's a rather pointed irony usually in an alien robot disguising himself as the one type of vehicle most directly associated with aliens, but somehow this feels like both the most obvious place to look and the last place you'd actually consider. His detailing is fairly straightforward, sticking mainly to hard geometric shapes with a number of vents strewn about his chassis. In the front, he has a pair of small cannons poking forward, and in the back, he has 2 sets of triple exhaust pipes on either side of his disc. His only stand port is also located at the back in the center of his trash can, which combined with his wide lower dish makes for a very awkward mounting situation should you wish to display him floating in the air. He is quite panelly, but that can be forgiven since he is a fantasy vehicle. It's also a little troublesome to start his transformation, because after you flip his arms out, you have to awkwardly crab claw the back end of the disc to pull it outwards. If you try to grab this irresistibly placed back panel to pull it out, you'll just end up popping it off. Also, make sure you do this before you try to flip his head out, because it'll get stuck otherwise. I should also mention the weird gap under his can and the visible yellow joints that kind of spoil the cohesion of the design. It comes off a little rough, and in a way, it's indicative of things to come. Now, while it is nifty and pretty cute for a vehicle mode, I think the obvious question is, how exactly do you justify adding a spacecraft to a subline themed primarily around race cars? The original Cosmos actually had little wheels, but this version neglected to include them. Why would a character without wheels be on Velocitron, a planet whose entire culture is centralized around racing? Everyone there is a race enthusiast, or as they call themselves, a racist. And you'd have to be more than a little bit racist to compete in the Speedia 500, the master race, where the winner is crowned the president of Velocitron, and thus the most racist person of all. It's a sardonic commentary on our own democratic process, you see. So because Cosmos can't be a member of that race, he has instead been made the commentator slash officiator of the Speedia 500, waving the oh so important checkered flag, and the flag can be swapped around, allowing Cosmos to turn from ardent racist to Frenchman in one easy step. The flag also doubles as Cosmos' weapon, a small green generic looking pistol. It's pretty minimal detail wise, but the most important part of this weapon is that for once in this godforsaken toy line, they designed it to be compatible with War for Cybertron blast effect parts. You can attach them to the little cannons at the front of the spacecraft too. And now he looks like he's ready to harass some poor elderly corn farmer out in a flyover state somewhere. You know, just like in Signs. The UFO mode is pretty sweet, and it's cool to get some fairly out of this world alternate modes from time to time, though it doesn't much look like a real UFO. However, it's concealing some much deeper issues. Cosmos' robot mode is a chunky green and yellow bot with a round stocky body, blocky yellow legs, and a red bullet-shaped head with large blue eyes. He's pretty much a dead ringer for the character as seen in the G1 cartoon, and has a much more sophisticated level of sculpted detail on the surface when compared to the original toy, but loses the toy's more colorful chest details. He has an average level of articulation, but also features a pair of movable little side skirts, as well as a waist swivel. His head also has a lot of movement, so he can look pretty expressive, which is a massive improvement over the original, which didn't even have eyes.
What's wrong with your face?
I have a slight problem with mine as well, where the right arm is pretty loose and floppy. It's not enough where the arm is unusable, but I've had multiple people mention to me that their copies were also loose in the same arm. It seems like it could be something to watch out for with this figure. So he's pretty cartoon accurate, but he wasn't always gonna look that way. Cosmos was initially conceived as a retool of Origins Bumblebee, until our blessed Japanese team worked their mysterious Nippon magic and gave Cosmos his own mold with a minimal amount of tooling. And it shows in multiple ways, good and bad. You can really appreciate how talented and creative the members of the Transformers team can be when pressed for resources, especially with the modest level of complexity his transformation has, where it's not only fun to flip him back and forth between modes, but he also has some awfully clever ways to hide and utilize the excess kibble from his unique vehicle mode. Unfortunately, the drawbacks to a lack of resources also really come through on this figure. Because he's so simple, he has this rather lean quality, the same one that cheap dollar store type figures have. This isn't exemplified better than by the enormous gaps all over his body in every single piece. Now, we all hate gaps, especially thigh gaps, and Transformers as a toy line is frustratingly notorious for putting hollow, gappy parts in their figures as a cost-cutting measure. However, typically these gaps are loaded with more mechanical detailing, so at least the giant holes in your toys have a little bit of pizzazz. Cosmos features no such detailing in any of his gaps, and it's rather noticeable in his massive hollow arms, though they did remember to include a small indentation for his fists to rest in there. I've noticed this dearth of details on Override's innards as well, which really leads me to suspect that these two were all but rushed out the door and didn't spend enough time at the finishing touches stage of the production process. It's sort of a small problem and one that I don't think most people would bother to notice, but it reflects on the overall integrity of the figure. It doesn't make me dislike him. I still think he's a fun and clever figure, and he doesn't exactly have any major problems otherwise, but he's in this awkward position where he feels a touch overvalued. If I had to quantify it, I would say he's just above the quality of a Cyberverse figure. There's nothing wrong with that, but typically those cost around $16 and are somewhat less refined than a mainline deluxe. So sticking a deluxe price tag on a figure of roughly that caliber seems way out of line, and it doesn't help that he's been short packed and already commanding a premium aftermarket price. That's like the very definition of overhyped. So I hope everybody who wants him can find him at retail, or at least for a fair enough price, because a new figure with some limitations is still better than no figure at all in my opinion. So thank God for foreign ingenuity, because without it, we may have never gotten a G1 accurate Cosmos that's pretty decent. Just like without it, we may have never won the space race, never ask a woman her weight, a man his salary, or NASA, who all those suspiciously German guys working on the Saturn V project were. Check out the Legacy playlist for more Legacy Transformers reviews. But as always, that's just my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye bye. Oh my god. Somebody's got to update his wiki page. Hasbro tends to handle non-G1 characters with the tenderness of a hungry Tyrannosaurus Rex locked in a room full of delicious, creamy children. Which is to say that if they aren't maimed until horrifically unrecognizable, they've lost anything about them that made them unique or distinctive in the first place. So as Legacy heads into its third and final year, and as they've coincidentally started running out of G1 characters anybody gives a shit about, is Legacy United Animated Universe Optimus Prime a sign of the tides turning? Will Hasbro finally embrace what they needed to since Legacy began? Welcome back to the show, it's Gay for May. I've definitely mentioned before that Animated is my all-time favorite Transformers show, and since the series has been out of the limelight for so long, getting a new animated figure is like coming home to an old friend, especially if that old friend happened to look like Fern from Free Your End, wearing a golden bikini, holding a Barnes & Noble gift card. My usage of the word coming would be applied very generously. Animated Universe Optimus feels like meeting that old friend again. Hasbro went above and beyond, making sure this character looked as authentic as possible. The boxy, non-Euclidean masses of shape, crisp lines and angles making up the surface details, and his proportions are, in a word, super heroic. Derek Wyatt's iconic art style shines throughout this figure. This high level of regard for the show's design language extends to the head sculpt in particular, which was something I definitely was not expecting. I thought they did a pretty good job with animated Prowl, but it was as if they turned him into a G1 character. Optimus is so true to the cartoon appearance that he actually has black outlines around his eyes and face. They did tip the scales back just a little bit, putting a dash of Generation Speedia on there by making the head a little boxier and adding some extra surface detailing to his body. This brings the figure that much closer in likeness to G1 Optimus, but without pushing it as far as, say, Legacy Skyquake. Legacy Animated Optimus is a robustly designed toy. All of the major joints are pinned and every piece seems to be molded in the proper color. The figure has a great sense of cohesion thanks to this, especially in vehicle mode. Even the chest is red plastic with a painted insert for the windows. So while there is a lot to love about this toy, you can tell Hasbro is still up to their usual shenanigans in a few obvious ways. First of all, most of the paint went toward the vehicle mode, so Hasbro did get a little stingy Ikari when it comes to the robot mode. He's missing yellow accenting on his head, his fists, and his feet. I know paintwork is expensive, but I think there needs to be some kind of rule for how paint is applied, because when the bottom half of the figure is almost completely devoid of paint, it gives it that play school effect that I just don't care for. Another thing I don't care for is how out of all of the other visible gaps on this figure, including several that face the front of the toy, the ones they decided to fill in were in the bottoms of his fists. They are good looking fists, to be fair. Nice big thick digits, perfect for finger blasting some black arachnussy behind a Little Caesars. But his hands are actually so big, he has a hard time holding certain accessories if the handle is too short. There is an obvious masturbation joke here, but I'm not sure I can pull it off. It might rub some people the wrong way. And let's not beat around the bush here. Optimus's axe it's just okay. I'm glad that they went for a very accurate sculpt, which the old Voyager failed to do do actually. And they even had the great foresight to put a 5mm port in the booster, so you can add some effect parts to turn it into a rocket axe. But it's so fucking big. It's bigger than Mei-chan. The reason the axe is so big is that for whatever baffling reason, Hasbro decided this figure needed to have an actual gimmick. You may have noticed that the upper part of the axe is thick as shit, and that's because the bottom part of the handle telescopes out, much like it does in the show. While it is a cool idea, conceptually, this bulbous and phallic section makes the weapon look silly. I much would have preferred if the axe had a show-accurate thin black handle, maybe with an extension piece for two-handed poses. With or without the axe, he poses alright, thankfully. Optimus's articulation is fairly standard stuff. His arms and upper body are quite mobile, and his head has a nice range of motion, but his legs feel somewhat stiff because his thighs are so short, and that can make dynamic poses more challenging. To correlate with the visual design of the figure, the transformation also indulges in a markedly faithful approach to its execution. Fans of the original animated toy line may immediately recognize various elements taken from both the Deluxe and Voyager class primes, perfectly fusing them together to create a uniquely structured transformation, with just a touch of modern sophistication on top. Like these flip-out hands that I love. That shit got me shooting rope like I'm Joseph Joestar. As with the robot mode, Optimus's vehicle mode hasn't shied away from accurately recreating the fire truck cab from the show, mainly opting to add some new detailing to make it look more high fidelity. The cab is kinda panely on the sides, but I love how they've been able to conceal any garish joints. There's some pretty ugly nub marks on the tops of the bumpers too, but hey, check this shit out. If you open up the front of the cab, you can see two little seats molded onto his shoulders, and a steering wheel molded behind his windows. Really cool, realistic embellishments like this are such a treat, and remind us of that robots in disguise aspect of the series. He's not wearing a fucking truck as a shirt, okay? He is the truck. Combined with other great details like the all-painted windows and the two-tone light bar, I think this beast looks rather sexy. That is until we see the other side of the vehicle mode. Oh no, not this again. Look, I just don't like the way his feet awkwardly sit right between his wheels. I will admit, it could always be worse, and they at least sculpted a few details in. So is it really that bad compared to having an awkwardly shaped, chopped off chunk of a rear end plopped on top of it? The only awkwardly shaped rear end I want plopped on top of me is my sister's. Legacy United Animated Universe Optimus Prime fully embraces everything that made Animated such a special show. Between the reverence given to the aesthetics of the series, to the callbacks to the very toy line it spawned, Hasbro has created something that would have given me wet dreams back in 2008. It's not a true remake of the original figure, however. They've still injected it with a moderate infusion of Generations flavor. Sadly, there's multiple problems keeping Optimus from truly sticking the landing too, and they're not minor enough for me to simply overlook. I think I would still cautiously recommend this figure, mainly for its excellent fan service and because it represents a promising direction for mainline Transformers. I'm excited to see more from this year's Legacy pickings, so there's at least one good thing going on with this company right now. They really can't sell that license to Takara fast enough. But anyway, Merry Christmas. I'll see you guys in the new year with some new reviews. Those are my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye-bye. After nearly 15 years of mainline absence, Transformers Animated makes a grand return in Legacy. The Cyber Ninja Prowl has just arrived through the space bridge, but has this new Legacy figure done him justice? Or will this be a repeat of the clumsy handling of the Prime Universe characters? Welcome back to the show, it's Gay for May. Prowl is not only one of the best characters in Animated, he's one of my favorite characters in the entire franchise. A ninja disciple of the late Yokeitron, Prowl is a loner at heart, preferring to spend his time immersed in the wonders of the natural world, but as the series unfolds, Prowl proves to be both a reliable friend and a selfless hero. Being the first animated character inducted into Legacy is a well-deserved honor, and on the third day he rose again to save Optimus Prime from destruction. So I've always been really keen on seeing how they would tackle a modern Prowl figure. Now, there's really no other way to put this. Prowl's robot mode is exactly what I was expecting it to be, which is to say that he's met my expectations for what a G1 interpretation of the character should look like, and has been satisfyingly modernized in regards to his engineering. He's been thickened up with a bit of that classic 80s mass, neutering the character's ranginess in order to unify his design with the vaguely G1 aesthetics of modern generations, but it hasn't left him completely unrecognizable. Since since they've also gone out of their way to retain his most distinctive features. I think this is best shown by one rather small detail that goes a long way to sell the look of Prowl. Animated is known for having a very recognizable visual style, which was wonderfully crafted by the series' art director, Derek Wyatt. And one notable feature of many of the show's characters are their very exaggerated facial structures. Honestly, Animated was an entire series full of Giga Chads. For real, on God.
Because I'm just that good.
They've attempted to recreate this with Legacy Prowl. His head, while quite blocky and G1ified, has a noticeably longer chin than most other characters, emulating the original Prowl's rather impressive length. Again, it's subtle, but it makes me believe that the designers get what's iconic and important about the character. Leaving this out would be like taking away Bulkhead's rotundness, or the arrangement of Knockout's car kibble, or RC's slim athletic figure. Oh my god, that's exactly what they did, isn't it? So even in a show that's known for its memorable art style, Prowl is easily one of the more stylized designs, making him a rather bold choice to be the frontrunner of Legacy's foray into animated characters. Prowl could have looked a lot worse, especially since the Prime Universe characters were treated with the same reverence that a child would have for her father's handgun, which is to say, none at all, and the results are almost always tragic. But he isn't 100% faithful either. They've added some new detailing like these stripes on his shoulders and arms, as well as a smattering of extra surface greebling in some spots, just to put a little bit of speech on that design. There's two changes that I actively dislike though. My first gripe is with the glasses. In the show, Prowl's shades are markedly sharp and angular. They've been toned down a bit on this figure. While I can understand why they would square them off, as it's more in line with the G1 depiction of visored characters, it was a really cool facial detail that I would have personally liked to have kept. His legs are asymmetrical now too, which is kind of interesting, but they've also changed the color of his wheels from gray to black, which takes away from the uniqueness of his atypical leg structure a bit. At least they've tried their best to retain other important things from the original figure, like the gimmicks. The caps on Prowl's wheels detach and unfold into a shuriken, just like on the original toy. Your mileage may vary on how well it works though. He comes with two, but only one of his hands is actually designed to hold them, the other having a standard 5mm hole, which I think is a decent compromise so Prowl doesn't get locked into just his accessories. I do think it's a shame that they didn't give him a wrist swivel though, especially because the rest of his articulation has been vastly improved over the original. Since his hands flip out now, he ends up having an open gap left over in his forearm. Thankfully, the only other noticeable gaps on the figure are the ones in his hips. I'm sure they needed to cut corners on him somewhere in order to budget for the mechanism in his weapons, but I kind of feel like it's unfair when you realize that Prime RC not only got to have a wrist swivel, but also stole the way Prowl's arms originally transformed, so she doesn't have any gaps there at all. Honestly, it's because of that little trick that RC lifted from Prowl that I was almost convinced that he was going to be a retool of her mold. I am very glad to say that he's not. RC might be the most accurate to her series in terms of her superficial appearance, but I think they've done an overall finer job at translating Prowl to the G1 aesthetic, and having his own mold is definitely a part of that. So he looks pretty great, at least in terms of his robot mode. Transforming Prowl is pretty straightforward, particularly if you're familiar with the movements of the original toy, but very few things deliberately connect together, and after you make all those connections, you still end up having to mush the bike into shape the rest of the way. It feels really crudely designed, but it does hold together when you're all done, so it's really the least of the vehicle mode's problems. Prowl's vehicle mode, at a glance, is an acceptable attempt at modernizing the sleek jet black motorcycle. It's got all the right details: the angular front end with the sharp headlights and wide windscreen, the large vented panels running along the side of the body, and the classic red and blue siren lights. But on closer inspection, the bike mode is a bit of a visual mess. The first problem is the most obvious. There's all these extra colors now. While there were clear visual differences between the appearance of the bike on the show versus the toy, one thing they both depicted was the uniform black color scheme, broken up with a few choice placements of gold or gray. Prowl just has all this extra gold and beige coming from his exposed shoulders and hip joints that severely detract from the vehicle's cohesiveness. I don't know exactly how they could have fixed this, since it's mainly a consequence of the updated design of the figure, and in that regard, it might have been unavoidable. It just accentuates the messy and gappy bundle of robot parts that are tucked under the rear end of the vehicle. But I think I might have forgiven it if it weren't for this other enormous hole that goes straight through the main body of the bike. I haven't seen a hole this big since I visited your mother last night and had a carnal relationship with her. She has a very big hole, you see. I didn't have a good time. I think a simple way to fix it could have been to widen the piece that the handlebars bar attaches to, since it sits directly underneath that gap. Just a small bit of plastic to fill in that hole would have made this bike mode a lot better looking in my eyes. All of these issues in tandem completely destroy any belief that this could be a real motorcycle, but it seems like it ends up facilitating the appearance of the robot mode, which I guess I'm willing to accept begrudgingly in this case. It's an interesting inversion of the problems we saw with the Prime Universe characters. As I've mentioned, they each had big problems with their robot mode designs, mostly failing to represent the characters accurately, but they all had really strong, if not stylish, vehicle modes. But none of these issues compare to the most annoying problem with Prowl's vehicle mode, the kickstand. First of all, you can't get it out while he's fully transformed, and second, it seems a bit too short. So while if you're really delicate in how you put him down, he will stand on it, most of the time he will just flop onto his side. So if you want him to stand on his vehicle mode, just prop him up with any extra blasters you have lying around. You know, say what you will about RC, but at least her kickstand works. And honestly, her motorcycle mode is absolutely killer and completely blows Prowls out of the water. Yeah, I want Prime RC to blow me to completion too. Really stretching with these jokes today. So I have some mixed feelings about Prowl. It would be so easy for me to tell you to go buy one right now, so Hasbro knows we want more animated figures. And I think you should. They've certainly done this one well enough for me to happily play with and display him for years to come. He's very stylish, and he's a lot of fun in robot mode. But the vehicle mode has its slew of problems, and I think if they just spent a little more time ironing out the obvious flaws, the vehicle mode wouldn't have been perfect, but it would have looked a lot nicer. I'm still excited to see more though, because I know animated has a lot of potential for great new figures. And if you want to see my new figures, head on over to the Too Gay for May channel. I'll be posting all my unboxings and talking about anime figures on there from now on, and I've already uploaded a handful of new videos, so please check them out and make sure you subscribe. But anyway, that's just my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye-bye. With nearly 40 years of history to pick from, sometimes we all wish Legacy would just focus on the legacy part of Transformers. But there's a reason Legacy needs G1 figures, and that reason is something Legacy Needlenose is doing better than anyone else. Welcome back to the show, it's Gay for May. Needlenose's vehicle mode is a gray and blue supersonic jet based on the F-16 XL. He has a bright red cockpit and a number of geometric shapes to be found around the figure, mostly consolidated to the center line, almost resembling a spine. Something that bothers me about this vehicle mode is that the gray paint toward the front of the jet is distractingly thick and doesn't match the plastic color very well at all. I do think that the all-red cockpit looks a little silly too, and it would have benefited if the struts on the canopy were painted in. Seeing the red and blue together really reminds me of the Autobot tracks, and these two actually share a pretty interesting connection. Both of them wear a sort of knight's visor in robot mode, and the IDW comics took this visual similarity to its logical conclusion by making them brothers who were in business with each other before separating over creative differences. You know, Michael Jackson had some creative differences with his family too. Now, Needlenose was initially intended for Siege or Earthrise, but something about him makes me think he's kind of a lost Power of the Primes figure. And that could be because the shiny striping on his wings looks like the glossy stickers from that line, or it could be how goofy this jet looks, as it's clearly a thin jet-shaped slab resting atop a folded robot body. You guys remember what I said about shell formers? This is a half shell former. The shell's only on the one side. This is fairly accurate to the original Needlenose toy, and generally I think jets tend to be some of the weaker alternate modes for Transformers, as they're often nerfed visually to facilitate a much stronger robot mode. I don't think it's unfair to question why they maintained this outdated design. However, the rest of the figure more than makes up for it in my opinion, which we'll get to soon. But at least one of the ways that the vehicle has been improved is how the weapons can interact with the jet mode. We'll talk about them exhaustively later, but in vehicle mode, Needlenose's weapons can plug onto the tips of his wings or combine together to form a larger booster that plugs into his rear. As far as I know, this wasn't possible with G1 Needlenose, so it's cool that they added extra functionality to the vehicle mode, and it's one of those things that makes this figure feel like a straight upgrade. The transformation is really simple, again mostly aping the broad strokes of the original toy, but updating it in a modern and interesting way. The legs swing out and down. You don't do much to the jet portion itself, but the way it shifts positions is a really cool move. And I love how the upper body explodes out of the torso, especially how the head flips up to replace the jet's proprietary stand port. Needlenose is bad. Like Michael Jackson bad. He looks incredible. His chest is broad and stocky, his arms are massive, and his legs are blocky and thick. However, due to the nature of the transformation, his legs are super hollow too. This was one of those things that actually put me off from this guy initially, and he definitely would have benefited if at least his thighs were filled in or covered up. He looks good. He's got a huge ass holes in his thighs, but I'm a big fan of the detailing on this figure. He has a lot of standard lines and vents, but I love certain touches such as the outlining around his 5mm ports, the individual isolated panels, and these really deep vents in his chest plate. And you'll find even more detail behind and inside his chest that you would only ever see during transformation. It's a small thing, but it's a testament to the overall quality of this figure. But the biggest and most necessary update to Needlenose is the posability. Since the original could only move its arms up and down, his elbows are double jointed and he has wrists. His hips have an incredible range of motion, but it's slightly limited by his wings and backpack, as is his waist. His knees have a very deep bend too. His ankles can tilt almost 90 degrees, and he can point his toes. Even the movement of his head is very unhindered, despite all the clutter surrounding it. An issue I've encountered while posing him though is that his nose cone likes to detach from his backpack, so you'll have to reconnect it often while handling him. But his posing options should feel mostly unlimited, whether that's alone or with his accessories. Now, unlike Michael, who was often accused of sexual misconduct, with virtually no evidence for it, Needlenose definitely came with some little boys. A pair of target masters that I've already forgotten the names of, so we'll just call them Batgirl and Magneto. Both of them are pretty cool and have a decent amount of detail. One that I really enjoy is that they're both molded with their own weapons in hand. Magneto has a blaster and Batgirl has a small sword and shield. These two are teeny tiny, but that makes them just the right size to become a convincing pair of weapons. Both of these guys unfurl to become a set of blasters that Needlenose can dual wield or combine into a larger gun. Magneto becomes a purple rifle with a little underslung dick and balls. What did Hasbro mean by this? While Batgirl is a more sci-fi styled twin barrel blaster. Of the two, I think Magneto might be my favorite. He simply doesn't have any of the issues that Batgirl has, who's coated with this extremely glossy black paint, which makes the details really difficult to see. And after just a bit of playtime with Needlenose, he's already gotten his little handle rubbed off. Wait, I mean he polished his... The paint's missing. It's pretty annoying that following the intended play pattern is enough to damage the figure somewhat, and he probably should have been cast in black plastic. The upside is, of course, that including these two fairly involved accessories was accomplished seemingly without making any compromises to Needlenose himself, which is a huge triumph in my opinion. Whenever we see a Legacy character in Legacy, there's always something that's off. Accessories are missing, alt modes are changed, or they're just plain fucked. But there's a different F word that I would use to describe this treacherous trendsetter, and that's faithful. Legacy Needlenose's raison d'être is essentially to be a faithful update of the original figure, while improving on nearly every aspect. I think Hasbro could stand to be more faithful when updating characters from other series, and Needlenose is the perfect example of how to do it right. And if you want to see another review where a guy comes with a little boy... Remaking a figure is like putting together a good cover song. You have to take what works so the song is recognizable, but you also have to balance that with what unique aspects you can add. Otherwise, what's the point of making a new version of the song at all? Welcome back to the show, it's Gay from May, and as the golden age of Kingdom ends, soon the reign of Legacy will begin. Serving as Kingdom's encore and Legacy's opening act, Voyager Blaster is a dazzling little number from the fine folks at Hasbro. The very fine folks at Hasbro. And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that Blaster might just be the most perfect cover of a G1 figure that I've ever seen. Blaster starts off as this righteous ghetto blaster, a relic of 1986 updated with added detailing and made asymmetrical in a few areas. There's all sorts of new little buttons and panels on him, as well as a bunch of unlabeled knobs aimlessly pointing in different directions. As someone who has a cursory knowledge of audio engineering, I think this is kind of hilarious. I'm taking a very educated guess here and saying this is probably the volume knob. But if there were ever a transformer to say turns into a literal brick, it'd be this one. He doesn't really do anything besides capitalizing on the toy's main gimmick of deploying and storing eject.
Fat bitches, that's all you see.
Well, he does actually have articulation though, since the handle can move up and down, and the rifle even has a dedicated storage spot on the back. He's lost a few of the finer details, specifically the on and off switch and the labels for the buttons and the headphone jack. There's simply no room for such text due to the size discrepancy. Oh Jesus, I forgot how big G1 Blaster was. Somewhat outdated in terms of alternate mode choice, and it's not quite 86 level of accurate. But ultimately, Blaster's alt mode is a faithful rendition of the original with a slight touch of modern design flair. Blaster's transformation is slightly more sophisticated than it used to be, adding a few extra steps and flourishes while retaining roughly the same motions that lead to a very refined and kibble-free robot mode. There's a couple hiccups though. His feet are a bit hard to flip out without tilting his ankles first, and the head's incredibly difficult to access, due to a combination of the small space it hides in, and the fact that he has this big slick forehead that makes it hard to get a grasp on.
Mia, you better hide your baby or... I'm just playing.
You better hide that big-ass forehead.
You just have to pray you have strong enough fingernails to paw at the panel under his head until you can reach it. Robot mode is where the party really begins. Blaster recaptures nearly every design aspect of the classic toy, from the detailing in the shoulders and legs, down to even the small stuff such as the buttons over his feet and the sliders for his hands. But wisely, he elects to use the animation-inspired head, so he can slip easily into your Studio Series 86 collection as well. Blaster is truly a bot of many faces. The paintwork is pretty minimal, but Blaster doesn't have a particularly complex color palette anyway. And I like that. I like parts being cast in the color they're supposed to be. Some of the details that were stickers on the original are unpainted, unfortunately, and he also takes some inspiration here from the animation model for the placement of certain colors. Don't talk to me, or my son, or my son's son, ever again. Obviously, the biggest upgrade is the level of articulation. Blaster is fairly standard as far as modern Transformers go. He's just missing some wrists, and I don't think that's an unjustified ask on a Voyager class figure. His head's got a lot of wiggle range, and I love the design of his feet, because when you tilt his ankles, you can see that they're cut to accommodate the boombox handles running straight through them. Speaking of, something I do appreciate from the original Blaster is how the parts of the handle are set into his legs, as opposed to the new version where they sit on top. I mean, they're not in the way, but it looks less clean. Other than that, the thing that bugs me the most about this mode is that his hands don't have a solid place to click into, and they can freely swing in and out of the gap in his forearm. This seems to be intentional, since the shape of his thumb matches almost exactly to the cutout in his forearm above the wrist, and apparently is designed to facilitate him pressing his own buttons. I guess that's neat, but I hate when figures have loose parts and huge gaps in visible places. Well, gee, the old one has visible gaps too. So I guess it is actually accurate. Dude, they put a rub sign on his dick. Blaster includes his blaster. Small b. The Electro Scrambler is a long-barreled rifle-type weapon with a scope and a stock, and is not compatible with effect parts. Don't sell these if you're not gonna make weapons that can use them. Since he is technically a legacy figure, Blaster also includes his son, Eject, in lieu of an Energon weapon. Eject converts from an icy blue microcassette to a Minicon in an almost miniaturized version of Blaster's transformation. He actually looks like a microcassette too, the holes of which being represented with 5mm ports. He doesn't include any accessories of his own, but he's quite posable. I'm mostly just happy to see him because until the Netflix multipack, Soundwave didn't come with any cassettes for his Siege mold. Eject is built different though. He loves coming with his dad. I still don't really get why they picked Eject and not Rewind though. Cause you have to believe Rewind is the more popular of the two since his days in the IDW comics. It's probably so he can be on the same sprue as Blaster's chest panel, but maybe we'll see a twin cast in the future and he'll include a baby Rewind of his own. By the way, I'm not opening this, so don't even ask. Stop. No. Blaster is interesting because he's about as direct of a modernization of the original toy as you can get. And he does it well while incorporating aspects of the animation model, creating a sort of definitive edition of the character. Throw in Eject as a great bonus, and suddenly you're getting a complete play experience with this guy. I struggle to find anything that I consider a major flaw in this figure, and even the few problems I mentioned are more like nitpicks or matters of taste. I'm so glad he's receiving a dual release because I think everyone deserves to add Blaster to their collection, and I believe he's pretty much a must-buy. Well, mostly because he doesn't get a lot of new figures and art reissues, so they probably won't make another one. It's weird that half of my reviews so far are cassette-related characters. If you want to see another one, I've reviewed his nemesis Soundwave on a previous video, so go check that one out. But anyway, that's just my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye-bye. The year of our Lord 2020 blessed us with the fantastic Centurion Drone Weaponizer Pack, featuring the Argent Adonis, the titular Centurion Drone, and this fabulous assortment of blasters and accessories designed to make all of your Earthrise figures seem totally incomplete without them and make you feel like an absolute dunce for not buying this. I have the Japanese version, and it came with this really cool sleeve too. Listen, you ain't gonna get this kind of premium shit from Hasbro USA, I guarantee you. Following up that absolutely phenomenal bundle is the Tricranius Beast Power set, and is packaged just the way I like it. Brown cardboard box, write the name on this side. Oh yeah. Bro, there's a fucking monkey in the box too. Optimus Minor confirmed-o. Open it up and you're greeted with this really nice illustration of Tricranius attending his first electric forest. Inside we got the boy, and we got the toys. Let's look at the effects first. Now, I opened this already, but I repacked it to show you that they came wrapped just like this, in tissue paper. This seemed kind of notable to me because it meant that there wasn't a lot of plastic to throw out with the packaging, just the little ties to hold the figure securely. Listen, you know, we all want to eliminate the waste from the packaging. This is a good way to do it. Don't do this. Don't do this shit. Do this. Other than that, I was pleasantly surprised when I opened this because for some reason I was under the impression that it included 2 sets of the same part, but in different colors. Come to find out, there's one set of these red fiery explosion pieces, and then there's one set of these blue laser pieces, which I don't think I had seen before. That J Balvin Soundwave has these too. Just makes me want it even more. One day. Comes with these like beam sabers, that's pretty cool, and a few of these little explosions, and this extra miniature photon beam. Wow. Cast in a translucent orange and obsidian coalescence, Tricranius has the appearance of an undead knight powered by a smoldering molten energy. His deadly, spiky weapons accentuated by this intense glowing yellow. He reminds me a lot of the Burning Fallen from Target like 100 years ago. It's kind of hard to believe this guy's actually a Maximal. I really like the heavily armored look with this barrel chest and these bulky shoulders, but because his shoulders are so bulky and they only rotate forward and back, the articulation in them feels just a little limited. Not to mention that the ports that they attach to are painted, so I try not to push them all the way in, lest I rub or chip the paint off of them. They also rejiggered his beast mode from a Styracosaurus into a Triceratops. The beast mode is a pretty faithful reconstruction of a real fossil, though they took a few liberties, particularly with the head sculpt. I can excuse the placement of the horns, because it's just simpler to put them on the frill so you can swap the parts around, but the face kind of looks like it's got skin on it. That's weird. Now, I see why they call it a Tricranius though. I feel as if I need 3 heads to understand the justification behind creating a set of blast effect parts and including a dude with no gun. Now, to be fair, they can attach to his horns or plug into any of the 5mm ports, but that looks stupid. And even the box tries to trick you by showing him busting a whole rope out of his Spider-Man web blaster. That piece doesn't actually fit on the peg like that. The Centurion drone actually had a similar dilemma, where they give you this big-ass cache of guns, and then they give you a dude with no hands to hold them properly. Actually, now that I think about it, both of these guys don't have hands. Anyway, this is a nifty set. I sure hope they keep making shit like this. Just make these every year, alright? Especially since next year is heavily rumored to be a return to the true form of the Generations line with Legacy. There's gonna be so many potential things you could put in a new accessories pack. Give me a Grace Sword. Give me a Dark Star Saber. Give me a fucking big squishy titties for RC. Amid the grand calculus of the Transformers universe, Windblade has been long overdue for a new, proper transforming figure. But as her strongest soldier, I stand here today forced to ponder a horrifying question. Is Legacy Windblade the ugliest fembot ever? Welcome back to the show, it's Gay for May. Despite becoming one of the modern faces of the franchise, Windblade has been conspicuously absent from the entirety of the War for Cybertron series, and all of Legacy until now. My little peeper was absolutely bursting with hot, sticky excitement when I found out she was finally getting a new figure in Legacy United. Because as I'm sure longtime viewers are aware, I love Windblade. I wish I could have children with her. Legacy Windblade takes her primary design cues from the Cyberverse version of the character. Such elements are the chunky legs with the less prominent heels, the blue stripes around her chest, and the more simplified head ornamentation. But since her introduction to the franchise, Windblade has had multiple incarnations over the years. So while the figure is depicted as Cyberverse Universe Windblade, designer Mark Mayer drew inspiration from all versions of the character while creating this figure. This is most obvious with the vehicle mode, which is broadly like the jet mode of the original Thrilling 30 figure, both in appearance and transformation steps. The blockier shoulders appear to be drawn from the Prime Wars trilogy, and she got that long-ass pussy from the Titans Return figure. Man, I sure wish she had the thickness of the Titans Return figure too. And therein lies my biggest problem with this figure.
Where are the big boobies? Where is the fat ass? The protoform-bearing hips?
Nah, but seriously, she's sculpted like Windblade, but she isn't built like Windblade. I don't want to put my pee-pee in that. It's like they sucked out all of her girly goodness. And Cyberverse Windblade was already supposed to be the modern milquetoast corporate interpretation of the character. So if that's too risque, then we are absolutely cooked as a species.
But gay for May, Windblade is literally an alien robot from space. Why does she need to look like a girl?
All right, listen up, you Neanderthal.
I know that's not the N-word you wanted to call me.
The point isn't so much about how feminine she looks, it's about how accurate to the source material she is. Cyberverse Windblade has a curvy Venetian body type, and I kinda expect to see that reflected in any figures of her, especially in a post-Legacy United world with the likes of Animated Optimus and Prime Thundertron, who are so faithful to their original designs. The idea that the now 2 Cyberverse fembots in this line have been subjected to differential treatment like this would raise a few eyebrows if this were any other fandom. To put it another way, imagine if Legacy Striker leaked tomorrow, and she was a sexy RC-like fembot with a Striker head stuck on top. The fandom would throw a shit fit, and rightfully so. Hasbro HQ would look like fucking Nakatomi Plaza by the end of the week, because it would be woefully inaccurate and unfaithful to the character, not to mention dismissive of what fans find appealing about her, while completely undermining their expectations for a figure of her. And the same goes for Legacy Windblade. I'm not saying there isn't a time or place for reinventing the characters, but just like with Cyberverse Shadow Striker, in this case, I would have much preferred a figure that adhered to the sensibilities of the original design. And yeah, that does mean she needs to look hot. I'm not gonna pretend like I don't want to see attractive fembots in this toy line. This series is full of murderers, sadists, Starscream is a racist, so I don't see why a girl with a big boobie is considered a step too far.
Well, that sounds like your problem, nigga.
But let's pretend that you are ideologically opposed to the scopophilic rationale underpinning my criticism of this figure, as I know some people are. That's fine. Luckily, as far as this review is concerned, there's a lot more wrong with this figure's aesthetics beyond her sexual characteristics. I'd say the most frustrating one for me is the backpack. Windblade, like most other characters that turn into jets, has always struggled with what to do with her nose cone in robot mode, and usually it just ends up draped across her back. For Legacy Windblade, the nose cone splits open and condenses into a tight little backpack that's mostly able to hide behind her silhouette. It's a pretty solid idea on paper, but to accomplish this, they had to turn the front of the jet into a literal fucking cube. You would have an easier time convincing me that Bryce Dallas Howard was gonna show up at my house and sit on me before I ever believed that this jet could realistically fly looking like this. You can see from Mark Mayer's original SketchUp, he had intended for the nose to be more cylindrical in shape overall, with these vent sections hugging the sides. So how did that concept become this abomination of aerodynamics? Speaking of abominations, just take a look at her goofy ass sword. First of all,
it's purple.
Second of all, it doesn't resemble Windblade's sword from any incarnation of the character that I know of. It's supposed to look as if it's crackling with untamed energy, kind of like Kyle Ben's lightsaber from Star Wars. And when you store it away in vehicle mode, it becomes a plume of exhaust that trails behind the jet. I guess that's cool. If you want to make it look like Windblade is flying over the Decepticons, bombarding them with a big purple Stanley steamer, now I can at least respect that there were clear artistic intentions behind these odd details, but the most dubious thing done to Windblade isn't just a blemish on this figure, it's an insult to the collectors too. The designers were not at all shy to mention this incredible secret gimmick with Windblade's VTOL fans.
And the fan blades spin around so you can pose them out in the black or the silver if you want, right?
Yeah.
The fans are painted silver on one side and all black on the other side. Hasbro, come here. I gotta tell you something. Leaving a part of the figure unpainted is not a feature. It just means that you're shit! This is why you guys lost $1 billion fucking last Christmas. It's one thing to make stupid garbage toys that nobody cares about, but don't shit on my Cheerios and tell me it's fucking fudge topping, okay? And where are her titties? I know I've been incredibly harsh on this figure so far. Deservedly, I feel. But in the interest of fairness, is there anything that I think is actually good about this figure? Well, yeah. There are a few things. If nothing else, Windblade easily meets Hasbro's current standards of quality. The plastic doesn't feel cheap, her construction is solid with all pinned joints. She has a competent level of articulation too, including wrists, which help a lot with sword poses. And she has a really easy time grasping it with both hands. And I'm not just talking about that sword. I might not be a fan of the execution of the backpack, but I can appreciate that they tried some new ideas with her. I especially like these panels that form the bottom of the jet, but then flip around and fill in the back of her legs in robot mode. The one thing that I will absolutely praise about this figure, however, is the paintwork on her face. Her kabuki makeup looks great, and all the tiny blue and gold ornamentations on her head have been meticulously applied. I also really like the shiny pearly white they've painted her face with. Damn, I got something pearly and white to paint her face with too. Shit. Legacy Windblade is like the new Coke of Windblade figures. It fizzes the same, kinda looks the same, I want to put my mouth on it the same, but the flavor is all wrong. Is she the ugliest fembot ever? Well, between the unflattering, unfeminine robot mode and these awkward looking design choices, I genuinely feel like they've tried to make this toy ugly on purpose. As a Windblade superfan, I can't recommend this figure, as I don't believe it does justice to the character. Unfortunately, it is also the most robustly constructed, streamlined Windblade figure that there is, so I have to admit, if you don't already have the Kabuki Cutie in your collection, it's probably the best option currently. As for me, I'm just hoping Hasbro lets fembots be fembots from now on. Alright, fuck this. I'm buying third party now.
Do you have your passport? Did you get your tax? Who wants to come back when
Legacy has had great successes fusing different characters together into a single figure that represents both, whether that's Elita-One and Minerva, or Skyquake with his G1 version. But with these composite characters, what happens if you go too far and completely overshadow one character in favor of another? Welcome back to the show, it's Gay from A. Cyberverse Universe Shadow Striker is a rather fitting character to undergo this treatment, given her backstory. As one of the more prominent recurring antagonists in Cyberverse, she was introduced as a rival to Bumblebee. When a confrontation between the two left her in total disrepair, she was rebuilt by Shockwave, given a mismatched body with disproportionate and off-color limbs, taken from the scraps of other fallen Decepticons. Now that's what I call a blowjob. Anyone familiar with Shadow Striker might look at this vehicle and think, oh wow, they finally gave her an Earth-based alt mode. And broadly, that's what they've done. It's got a similar body style, even down to some of the subtler details of the car, and has many of the same features, like the red wheels and the fact that her pussy is hanging out, but it's also hard to miss the obnoxious red engine block placed smack dab in the middle of the car. While the car is primarily inspired by Shadow Striker's vehicle mode from Cyberverse, its distinct engine block is borrowed from the Dodge Viper alternate mode of her namesake. The original Shadow Striker was a repaint of RID Sideburn, and was released in a quote-unquote BotCon 2-pack with her sister, Roulette, way back in caveman days, 2003. That was the year I saw my first nipple. The car overall looks really cool and slick, especially with its blood red windows and low-profile design, but one thing that really annoys me about it is the roof. The roof is removable and will later serve as an accessory for the robot mode, but I can't get it to tab in place properly or sit flush against the rest of the car. Transforming her into vehicle mode can be a pain too. I didn't understand how to convert the front at first, so I brute forced it and pretty much destroyed these latching tabs on her fenders. In my defense, it's an incredibly tight fit, and her hips tend to buckle outward when you press down on her, just like your mom. The best way to do it seems to be to push the entire thing over her hips all at once, and then to press down on each headlight to click them into place. And when transforming her to robot mode, you simply do all that in reverse. Shadow Striker has a nice transformation that feels both uniquely designed and fun to do. While she is a bit of a shell former, and a parts former for that matter, the process is quite graceful and straightforward. There's a definite flow to it, a distinct sense of direction that underlies the process. After the limbs flip out, the frame of the car accordions back down, converting the length of the vehicle into the height of the robot, as if by magic. Shadow Striker's robot mode noticeably does not look like her. Neither how she looks in toys and packaging art, nor her piecemeal appearance seen throughout the series. This figure is heavily styled after her universe counterpart, lifting most of her aesthetic cues and details, and pretty much leaving only the wheels on the back and the head sculpt to reflect the Cyberverse version. Like I said before, this isn't a new move for Legacy, but this seems a little uncharitable to Shadow Striker since this is her first normal figure. The two Shadow Strikers don't even have much to do with each other aside from the name. Even then, Cyberverse Shadow Striker was originally going to be called Night Racer, answer. I guess Mark Mayer needed to fulfill his yearly quota of fembots and obscure series references, so Shadow Striker became a convenient way to kill two birds with one stone, and presumably bringing us closer to a legacy sideburn in this roundabout way. But why didn't they just make him? I didn't want Shadow Striker as designed by Naughty Dog Studios, okay? I live in the United States of America. My president is black, my Lambo is blue. Luckily, old Gay for May has found a solution. Introducing Shadow Striker Big Ones. As long as you don't completely tuck in her chest when transforming her, you can make it look like she has a humongous pair of heavy metal hangers on her chest. Wow, I'm sold. This might be the best legacy figure yet. Well, she's definitely one of the quirkiest, especially after the geniuses at Hasbro got a little too silly with her articulation. If you remember Tarn's shoulders, you're gonna want to sit down for this. Shadow Striker's shoulders pivot from her back. The motion takes some getting used to, and although the range is still mostly comparable to normal shoulders, they've completely sacrificed all backwards movement. The only actual benefit this offers is that it facilitates her weird transformation. Said transformation, unfortunately, has another annoying side effect. Your mileage may vary, but the tabs that hold her spine together are held in place by friction alone. And because her vehicle kibble drapes all the way down her back, I find it's really easy to accidentally press on these door flaps and pop the backpack off while posing her. But what is a cool pose without cool accessories, which is another area of this figure that's been heavily weighted toward the universe version of the character. First of which, she has a blaster, a devilishly designed pistol that's based off of Sideburn's so-called drag knife. With that name in mind, she can also hold the stock of the blaster like a handle and wield it as a melee weapon. And if you have certain blast effect parts, you can convert it into a cool beam saber. The rear bumper of the car can be used like a small shield, or you can attach it to the front of the blaster to recreate the missile launcher included with the original toy. The roof can detach and become a shield on either arm, but it can be a bit annoying to plug in since the peg is on a hinge and will bend with enough pressure. But I would have liked to see at least one accessory that felt intended for Cyberverse Shadow Striker, either her shotgun or her machete. If not that, maybe even the Night Racer gun, as an homage to the character's development in real life. So overall, I feel pretty lukewarm about Legacy Shadow Striker. Now, I would never say no to getting another Decepticon babe, especially one with such major assets. And although the figure does some weird things, it's fairly inoffensive, but I feel like she has a major identity crisis going on. In terms of design and presentation, this figure heavily marginalizes the elements that represent Cyberverse Shadow Striker, overshadowing the first mainline release of the character in order to make reference to an at best tangential connection. It clearly wants to be a new RID Sideburn, and I wish they hadn't relegated such a unique character like Shadow Striker to be a mere pre-tool for somebody else. Special thanks to my friend Zesty for doing the thumbnail to this video, and if you want to see my analysis of a composite character done right, check out my review of Legacy Elita-One. But anyway, that's just my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye-bye. This is Legacy Elita-One, and she's so much more than a pretty face. She's the future of fembots, an expertly crafted fusion of cute, feminine aesthetics with chunky mechanical design that's sure to please Transformers fans of all stripes. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Welcome back to the show, it's Gay for May. Newly redesigned for Legacy 2022, Elita shares a mold with fellow fembot Minerva, and that's key to keep in mind as we discuss this figure today. Our story starts with this vehicle mode, a bubblegum pink and cherry red buggy with white accents in front, purple turbo boosters in the back, and her little pink crown sticking out from the top. I love the way it transitions from the round and curvy front end to the blocky and angular rear end. It almost represents the real-life evolution of aesthetics, whereas we head forward in time, cars become more rounded, leaving the harsher design elements behind us. I mean, who knows if that was the intention, but she definitely feels at home amongst the very retro-futuristic designs seen in the original series. It's not especially cluttered with details, and I do love the techie paneling seen inside the blue windscreen and the way that these vents tuck into the rear fenders. This vehicle mode is the reason why I don't consider Elita or Minerva the repaint, because it was really made with both of them in mind. It sort of borrows the overall shape from Minerva's original car mode, a Porsche 959, mashed up with specific details taken from Elita's car mode, or at least what you can see of it, because Elita's G1 alt mode is a bit of a Transformers mystery. Oh yeah, it's turning into one of those videos again. Elita's single appearance in the G1 cartoon is in the episode The Search for Alpha Trion, which is an absolutely horrible name for this episode. The episode is actually more about Elita and her team, their fight to survive, and their relationship with Optimus Prime and the other male Autobots. The search for Alpha Trion only happens near the end of the episode, when Optimus seeks his help to revive Elita. But when he gets there, Trion's all like, yeah, that bitch just needs a little bit of the touch, if you're picking up what I'm putting down.
You got the touch.
He's pulling his cock out.
You got the power. Optimus.
Anyway, the important part is that since this is Elita's one and only appearance as Elita-One, let me say that before I get comments about it, the only glimpses of her vehicle mode we get are these heavily obscured shots and this single pre-finalized model sheet. But what we can glean from these images is that there are definitely aspects that were incorporated into the legacy figure, like the front portion of the G1 vehicle inspiring the paneling on the bonnet and the big bubble windscreen instead of a more traditionally styled car top. But you know your boy Gay from May didn't come here without bringing the juice, so what does Elita's vehicle mode actually look like? Well, after my countless hours of tireless research, I can say 100% without a shadow of a doubt that Elita-One's vehicle mode probably just looks exactly like it does on the model sheet, and maybe they squared off the rear end similar to Chromia's vehicle mode. That makes the most sense to me since their transformations seem to be basically the same, and because of the way their heads poke out the top. Fucking Ironhide's country ass pulling a bad bitch like that after 4 million years, and I can't even get my sister to answer my phone calls. Generally, I like this new vehicle mode. It's a very cute and very well thought out little car that refreshingly strays far away from the archetypical example of a fembot vehicle mode. But does the robot mode continue this progressive design direction? When she was revealed, I said Elita-One was the cutest transformer ever, and I think I still stand by that. Everything from the soft colors to the adorable horns on her sweet little head, and her gorgeous face just screams mega cutie. In G1, she resembled a gladiator or an Amazon, and had a strong but kind of matronly vibe. Her voice is so hot too.
Request denied. You've got company. Elita-One out.
But Legacy Elita is more like the schoolgirl of Transformers, which, considering who her mold mate is, makes a lot of sense. The robot mode heavily favors the Minerva side of the coin for sure. Yeah, the females in this fandom will be absolutely shocked to find out that most fembots actually do look like they transform. Even back in G1, these one-off fembots had transformation schemes and vehicle kibble, though of course none of them had figures initially, and Hasbro did them a real disservice by just reusing the same mold to make all of them. Minerva, however, has an original figure, being a repaint of G1 Nightbeat, and that bitch. Unfortunately, the new mold isn't quite the Venus of Willendorf that the original Minerva was, but Elita's still very attractive and feminine, with these creamy white thighs, trim waist, and a hint of what we in the toy review business call boobies. But if you could see it from the front, wait till you see it from the back. Firstly, she actually has a back, and it's surprisingly well defined and shapely. And secondly, despite her small frame, she's got this huge, juicy white ass. God damn. Gay for me, the way you talk about female characters is really creepy, and you're making mecha fans look weird. Good. Elita's femininity is very evident, and it thankfully harmonizes with the tastefully restrained bulkiness of her mechanical limbs. They are blocky and chunky in typical G1 fashion, but they don't look disproportionate or overshadow her dainty frame. I want to highlight her lower legs in particular. The rear fenders of the car rather gracefully swing into position under her thighs. This is mass shifting done in an intelligent way, and I especially love how this piece of the roof folds and becomes the inside of her leg, though I do wish they could have helped lock her knees in place, as they can easily shift out of position. Despite these incredibly designed legs, the majority of her vehicle kibble still ends up strapped to her like a backpack. Guess they really took that schoolgirl thing to heart. The backpack honestly compresses the car very well, with the roof folding under itself and the hood sliding over top. It's almost as if Hasbro knows how to design a good backpack, and they just refuse to sometimes. Please join Patreon today so I can produce more videos complaining about G1 RC. Also, there's no food in my fridge. My main problem with it is that it's a bit too wide. You could say there are certain perks to sharing a mold with Minerva though. The fenders of the car can be repositioned to emulate the large pylons Minerva has over her shoulders, which thins out the backpack somewhat and provides a way to give both characters a unique silhouette. And if these little pieces could fold away too, this backpack would look really clean. So while it is unfortunate that Elita struggles with excessive vehicle kibble, I think they've done a decent enough job making it both unrestrictive and functional. On a different note, Elita's articulation is generally really good, with her arms in particular having an over 90-degree elbow bend and swivelable wrists. Everything else is pretty standard, but I want to make a note about her feet. They're not designed to swing freely as they softly click into place for the transformation, so you have to meticulously position them. And since they're just on a friction joint, I can't help but think they'll just loosen up over time and become useless. Thankfully for us, Elita doesn't use her feet to hold her weapons. Elita comes wielding a pair of large blasters, one loosely based off of the pistol in her debut appearance, and the other directly inspired by Minerva's blaster. They're cast in an icy blue transparent plastic and are subsequently pretty cool.
I am now days away from giving birth, and it is Jesus.
Anyway, I think Elita-One is a clever figure. She's cute, so I like her. She's properly designed like a real Transformer, but without sacrificing feminine charm and appeal. But Gay Frume, I thought you said you didn't like redesigning characters. I mean, I don't have to like She-Hulk to know I would let CGI Tatiana Maslany pound my little meatus into a breakfast sausage patty. If it's good, and I can recognize that even if I don't always agree with the principle. Plus, I like Orphan Black. I have an Orphan Black t-shirt somewhere.
Fetch me something gay. If
you want to see more reviews about fembots, you should check out this Windblade review or this RC review. But anyway, that's just my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye-bye. Every legend has a beginning. Arthur pulls the sword from the stone. Siddhartha Gautama abandons his life of riches. Christina Hendricks hits puberty.
But that was warranted.
2022's PulseCon exclusive, A Hero Was Born, is the start of a new legend. This monumental 2-pack features the sagacious Alpha Trion and the young bot destined for glory, Orion Pax. Alpha Trion is a substantial retool of Studio Series 86 Scourge. This colorful ancient transformer has a new head sculpt with a purple crown resting atop his old gray face, masked by a flowing white beard and mustache. The whole thing is framed by a high-tailored maroon collar, altogether giving him a look that's equally wise and regal. His shoulders and chest are newly detailed too, which is especially impressive as his torso is made of multiple pieces. He's got a huge Autobot badge plastered on his stomach like he got a dirty tattoo in prison, which wouldn't surprise me that he's been there considering that he's f***ing jacked as hell. Somebody's been enriching Grandpa's prune juice with creatine powder. Overall, Trion's design is somewhat more elaborate than most G1 characters, and I think they've done a decent job at capturing it with this figure, even going so far as to remold parts of the backpack to resemble his cape and painting the inside of it to match. Unfortunately, the backpack is also home to one of the sloppier design choices of this mold, namely these folded pieces of vehicle kibble that hang off and clutter it up, and the backpack's usage as a cape isn't quite as convincing as Scourge's wings. But another really sloppy aspect of this figure's design are these gappy, hollow thighs. They've been newly remolded from Scourge as well, and they just left them like this. To play devil's advocate, most aren't going to be looking at this guy from behind, and you could argue that it's more aesthetically pleasing than having the open gaps visible on the insides of the legs, but it feels so wrong. Trion's articulation is what you'd expect from a Voyager class figure. The shoulders on mine are a bit loose, and while he does have wrists too, he has these spikes on his arms that rub up against his hands and could scrape the paint off of them if you're not careful. A few of the other paint apps on my copy are a bit messy, and he has a couple of spots on his collar where it looks like somebody touched him with wet paint on their fingers. But that's a little mistake. The big mistake with this figure is that it creates a huge lore problem in this set. See, this set is primarily based on the episode War Dawn, where we get a glimpse of Cybertron's golden age before the Decepticons shattered the peace. A dying Orion Pax is brought to Alpha Trion after a deadly encounter with Megatron, where he is rebuilt into Optimus Prime. Oh yeah, the Aerobots are there too. Don't worry about that. But Alpha Trion was looking noticeably younger at that point in time.
If that young robot needs repairs, I suggest you take him to the next city.
He hadn't grown out his Fu Manchu mustache yet. He was still the cool young guy when he built Optimus Prime. He was probably like, what, 35? He wasn't just getting his mustache waxed back then, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. He was getting his peen. It's not a big deal, but I really hope the designers actually knew the lore and deliberately chose the more recognizable version of Trion over the accurate one. Trion also turns into a little space boat. I don't believe we ever see him transform, so honestly, he could have turned into anything, like a lion. But they've managed to make even this mode more distinct from Scourge by remolding the pieces covering his head and adding a more accentuated cockpit with some paint to emphasize the windows. Holy shit, Grandpa's got the boomstick! He's gonna put a hole through some minicons when they come up to his doorstep to sell magazines. The other accessories include Vector Sigma itself,
the mega computer which gave us all life,
a bright golden ball floating atop a small clear stand that has intricate techie detailing on its base. Along with that Sigma ball, you get its key. The key to Vector Sigma, which was held under Alpha Trion's protection until it was stolen by the Decepticons. You can tenderly insert the key into the top of the ball, but be gentle. Try to resist sticking it in too far though, because it's a real pain in the ass to pull it back out, you know? Just like in real life. So while the set is primarily branded around the birth of Optimus Prime, it actually covers pretty much the entire scope of Alpha Trion's involvement in the G1 series. Because during the episode, The Key to Vector Sigma, he f***ing dies. He's dead, he's gone. But though he has passed away, Alpha Trion's legacy lives on in his creation, Optimus Prime. But before he was the leader of the Autobots, before he was Megatron's greatest rival, before he balled in the NBA, he was just a regular guy like you or me. He worked an honest blue-collar job, he watched Demon Slayer on his iPhone, he loved white women. Orion Pax is a similarly substantial retool of Studio Series 86 Cup, featuring a new head, chest, arms, and chins. The distribution of colors clearly parallels Optimus Prime's classic look, but I like the usage of the less vibrant vibrant pastel blue here. It's understated and kind of represents Orion's innocent nature, being that he's just a sweet baby boy. But what I'm a really big fan of is the white legs. First of all, they're painted, so premature yellowing is hopefully not going to be an issue. Secondly, they immediately make me think of the cel-shaded Siege Optimus repaint, which is one of my favorite versions of that mold. Optimus toys usually have silver or gray legs, but he has white legs in the cartoon, and I like when the toys match that appearance. It almost makes these companion pieces. Like, this is Optimus just after he was rebuilt by Tryon, and he's very shiny and new. I think this mold absolutely rocks. It's one of my favorites from Studio Series 86, and I'm glad to have an opportunity to finally talk about it. It works so well for Orion packs. He's kind of small and wiry, making him look incapable as a warrior, creating a huge contrast between him and Optimus. He certainly ain't a little fat ass like he was in the show. Ariel must be one of them girls who likes big boys. I guess they thought he was still close enough to Optimus to warrant going all out though, since they've given him light piping, but they also painted over his eyes. Think about how ridiculous that is. A show exclusive figure with brand new molding that surely won't be used ever again, and they painted over his eyes. Look, I even put a crying emoji in my script. His articulation is also the standard fare, with his bicep and thigh swivels being accomplished by some standard 5mm pegs, making them intentionally detachable. This is a fine, unobtrusive gimmick, but it does make me worry about the longevity of this mold, whether these pegs will loosen up over time or not. The plus side though is that he doesn't have any ugly gaps in these particular parts of his body, where typically they're very common. Other than that, one of the only things that I'm not a big fan of with this figure is the construction. Parts like the shins and the elbows are friction joints when they should be pinned. Some other joints like the shoulders and the tabs for the backpack are somewhat loose on mine. Orion has two accessories himself, a red copy of Cups Blaster, which really reminds me of a beam rifle from Mobile Suit Gundam, and a pack of Newports? What is he, from Detroit? Either of these can be held in his hands or slapped onto the sides of his vehicle mode. Why don't we take him there now? This transformation is very skillfully designed, with essentially the entire robot being consumed by the vehicle, and in turn, most of the vehicle being incorporated into the robot in a purposeful way. I mean, look at how he sucks in the front fenders and wheels into his body. You won't find sucking that good on X videos, I'll tell you that much. The process of converting the cab and then the truck bed feels so intentionally sequenced so as to make every move feel significant. Another thing that he shares in common with Siege Optimus, actually. I just love this truck mode too. What was already a fantastic, tight little vehicle works on so many other levels now. Again, the distribution of the colors directly harkens back to Optimus. And a pickup truck is such an obvious transitional form for a semi-truck to be derived from. They're big and loud, they haul stuff, and they make Redditors fear for their lives. Same as Tryon, you never actually see Orion transform, but you do see his friend Dion transform from a truck. So considering their line of work, it's a fair guess that he does too. You know, I've only just now realized that the characters in this episode are named Orion, Dion, and Tryon. The fact that their names sound so similar is probably a coincidence, right? But what if it isn't? Orion is either named after the hunter of the same name from Greek mythology, or his constellation that famously features a string of 3 stars known as Orion's Belt. The Orion correlation theory suggests that the 3 Great Pyramids at Giza were constructed to align perfectly with the arrangement of Orion's Belt. This theory was conceived by the author Robert Bauval, and was first published in the journal Discussions in Egyptology in 1989. 1989 was the same year that the NFL star Deion Sanders was drafted to the Atlanta Falcons. Deion sounds an awful lot like Dion, doesn't it? But get this, what was Deion Sanders' nickname when he was a player? Prime time! Your e-girlfriend and your sister having the same birthmark on their tits is a coincidence. This is Providence. Anyway, this is a decent set overall, but probably not a must-have for anyone but die-hard G1 fans. I really don't know if it warranted being a PulseCon exclusive. This could have just as easily have been an Amazon exclusive, and it probably wouldn't have been marked up an extra $7, but if you do pick it up, I don't think you'll be disappointed. Now, where does the legend go from here? Check out either of these 2 Optimus Prime reviews to find out. But anyway, that's just my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye-bye. This might be one of the goofiest looking Optimus Primes Hasbro has ever given us. Welcome back to the show, it's Gay for May, and the Transformers legacy continues with Legacy Laser Optimus Prime. Black and red and neon all over, Laser Optimus Prime is a slight departure from the average Optimus design, and his story begins about 30 years ago. The 90s were really interesting. The world was changing, and it seemed like it was going in the right direction. Information technology was developing at an incredible pace, allowing us to bring our wildest dreams to life, but also stoke our greatest fears.
What's going to happen in the Y2K? Will I lose my benefits?
And the US even elected its first black president. The 90s were sick, but the 90s were also going to revolutionize the way children play.
Power Rangers! Black Power, motherfucker!
With imports from Japan set to dominate the children's market in the coming years, a stranglehold that exists to this very day, Transformers were all but done. But its continued success in Europe impressed Hasbro enough to revitalize the brand, giving us Generation 2.
Transforming from big rig into powerful robot, he's the greatest Autobot warrior of them all.
And Laser Prime was one of the new standout designs from this reboot. And here he is today, updated with modernized engineering. But for all the legacy hype, and as someone who typically loves an obscure 90s reference, I have one really annoying problem with this figure. But I can say wholeheartedly that I don't have any misgivings about the vehicle mode. Laser Optimus's truck mode is absolutely sublime, especially with the added trailer. Bold of Hasbro to release a toy of an oil tanker in such trying times. Now a long-nosed semi with a flame pattern, he's surely a cheeky nod to Bayverse Optimus, as the original Laser Prime featured a simpler red and black gradient. The colors across the trailer are tonally cohesive, giving us one of the darkest Optimus color schemes that isn't a Nemesis variation. The tail end of the truck is mostly reused from Earthrise Prime, but the entire front is brand new, and honestly, I would say it's much more realistic. The details and the shapes are straightforward. You can easily pick out the placement of the door, the side mirrors are larger, and there's even little steps to climb into the cab. I like the shape of the windows wrapping around the front and sides, but since there's nothing interesting to see within, I would have preferred the same silver undercoating that Earthrise Prime received. He is a long boy. When compared to Earthrise Optimus, Laser Prime is about 30% longer. You know? My sister started seeing someone who's 30% longer. Us Mexicans, we're pretty thick guys overall, but we can't compete with that white meat, if you know what I mean. And with that, this episode has reached its quota for self-flagellating racist jokes. I'm sorry if you don't get it. Thanks for playing, everybody. What's funny about this trailer is that it doesn't really work that well with Earthrise Optimus, as it loses a lot of range of motion. And you can see they've cut down on some of the 90s cheese, removing the large graphic with the big bold name tag running along the side. Something that the Titans Return version actually retained. But then again, Titans Return did just about everything a little better, didn't it? I'm actually a much bigger fan of this trailer than I thought I was gonna be. Usually I don't like these battle station gimmicks because I don't find them particularly interesting, but the transformation being fun and simple along with the functionality is what won me over. The tower in the center can turn, as can the turret, and you can park Optimus alongside to get beat off by this little articulated arm. The turret can also be removed and given to Optimus as a secret extra blaster. There are dedicated storage spots for his handheld weapons, but both can also attach to the truck for readily available and self-contained storage. His two other weapons are a blue energon axe and a longsword, which can be held separately or combined into a massive two-handed sword. Unfortunately, the handle for the axe is actually a bit too thick. It doesn't really fit in Prime's hand, and I don't want to force it. Laser Optimus Prime is an almost regal-looking design, with big silver shoulder pads and exaggerated antenna, giving his head a crowned appearance. He replicates most of the main color placements of the original, and it's interesting to think that he's primarily silver, gray, and black, with Prime's usual blue and red being relegated to accenting colors. This is not the weirdest Prime of this era, but you gotta wonder, why did so many G2 figures have such wild color schemes? Well, long before the Transformers team experimented with a little concept called Beast Wars, they were experimenting with something else entirely, crystal meth. And as a direct consequence of that, Transformers Generation 2 featured slews of characters that looked like a 4-year-old threw up all over them after a Skittles bender on Halloween. But the lustrous and translucent appearance of the drug also inspired the now standard usage of light piping in the characters' eyes. This was a super influential time for modern design practices. But what could possibly be my favorite part about this figure is the transformation. It reminds me a lot of Siege Optimus, who had a fairly complex transformation with several steps and specific timing for when to move certain pieces. Earthrise Optimus also has quite a few steps, but they're simpler and direct. Laser Prime is definitely less complicated than either of the other two, but transformations that force you to solve a dedicated sequence of steps will always be more fun to me, and is something that I think is underappreciated at times. Keep in mind, this is the opinion of somebody who doesn't follow the instructions when he gets a new Transformer. The torso isn't just unceremoniously placed below the chassis the way the originals was. It's formed in a way that cleverly allows for unnecessary truck details to be absorbed inside the body, similar to how Earthrise Prime eats the front face and grille of the truck to reveal the real robot body underneath. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, this does mean he has a fake chest. Now, I know that fake parts are a touchy subject for a lot of people, and a lot of you out there are real chest fans. I'm not saying I'm not one of you, but I believe that I'm fairly pragmatic when it comes to Transformers, and this isn't in response to any recent discussion in particular. But when the argument against fake parts just sounds like an appeal to traditional design standards, like if you wanted a figure to transform the exact same way the old version did, you probably should just buy the old figure and save your complaints. But that's neither here nor there. Impressive as the robot mode is in these many facets, there's one irking problem I have with it. The arms are hilariously out of proportion with the rest of the body. Most of the photos I've seen are really deceptive, because they tend to show him at a flattering angle, and his massive pylons can be distracting. But ignore that, and you'll see that not only are the arms super thin, his shoulders are hilariously dinky and positioned very low on the torso. You can see it especially when compared to Earthrise Prime. Legacy Prime is shaped like a competitive Naruto runner. Now, the reason that they did this, I assume, was to fit the arms inside the cab during transformation, with the assumption that the mass of the shoulder pads would help hide the dinkiness. Well, it really doesn't help from any angle beyond a 3/4 view. And what's even more frustrating is that the forearms hang out the back of the cab, so it's not as if they've been entirely concealed anyway. If you can't thicken them up the way they are now, why not just design the arms to become the cab itself? Well, you might have to find a new place to put the head then. Oh my god, Titan's Return really did do everything better. I gotta say though, keep doing these flip out hands as ball joints. It's not especially great in this case, but if you can give it to anyone else, I'd say it's a good practice to keep up. Laser Prime on the whole is a nice package and a fair alternative to Earthrise Prime. While I don't like certain aspects of it, such as the arms, I haven't noticed anyone else having an issue with these things, so it might just be a me problem. Hopefully if they do another production run, they'll fix some of these smaller issues like the axe handle. And if your axe can handle more videos, you should check out some of my other Legacy reviews in this playlist. But anyway, that's just my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye-bye. Legacy Inferno is one of the last characters that I would have considered to have a genius design, but some of the elements that go into this figure are so smart that he may have just became one of my must-have Legacy figures. Welcome back to the show, it's Gay for May. Inferno is a tall, lanky Predacon, his bright red carapace broken up by a few patches of dark burgundy, with a number of metallic blue embellishments on his waist and legs. These layered, plate-like sections of armor really sell the idea that he's integrated the insect exoskeleton into his robot body in a way that feels a little more natural than even skin and fur. His head shares that metallic blue color and features an absolutely devilish smile, and silver horns to boot. He's a real demon, and these large red eyes complete this wholly unsettling design. My man's be looking like some kind of giant movie monster come to life. Like an alien or a predator. I also greatly appreciate how little visible gappiness there is. Sure, his chest is clearly hollow, but the major gaps are kept to the undersides of his arms and behind his thighs. I don't understand how this isn't a standard practice. It's such a smart compromise that keeps the character looking appealing and whole. Don't do it like this though. Shockingly, all of the numerous spindly bug legs sticking out everywhere are solid pieces too, with no gaps in them. He actually has one too many sets of bug legs, the legs on his shoulders not appearing on either his original toy or his 3D model on the show. It's a weird quirk, highlighting how they've changed this figure from the original. Thankfully, they don't interfere with the articulation at all, as they have dedicated positions that keep them just out of the way when you're posing Inferno. His articulation is phenomenal, actually, having the typical range of motion you would expect from a Voyager, but including double jointed elbows and knees, in no small part thanks to his transformation. And speaking of small parts, he has these teensy little hands that look pretty ridiculous, but they do move independently from the insect legs that they're attached to. So by that metric, he's already more functional than some of his wave mates. His head's on a sweet little ball joint too. Amazingly, his jaw opens as well, so you can recreate the maniacal laughing and screaming he does throughout the series. Or make him look like he's just busted the fattest nut of his career. It's a relatively unique piece of articulation, one that vibes with the character perfectly and greatly increases his range of expression. Inferno's weapon is a large 4-barreled blaster. What's weird about it is that it's actually the wrong weapon, kind of. Inferno usually has this pistol grip rocket launcher thing. guns, and the included gun resembles his jet booster from his flight mode. As such, you can open up the thorax, flip out this extra slice of bug ass, and insert his weapon to recreate his flight abilities from the show. The blades even rotate too. Inferno's transformation is very simple. You mostly just fold and tuck his limbs beneath his carapace and hide away his head, almost like he's wearing an ant-shaped pelt. The thorax can be a little troublesome to convert, as you have to make sure his legs are positioned correctly before the pieces can fit together. It's also kind of weird to figure out how to stand him on his bug legs at first. I just put him down on his two front legs, and then adjust the back legs to match them. I think that's the right way to do it. Inferno's beast mode is a big-ass fire ant, named not so for their well-documented ability to shoot flames, but for the intense burning sensation attributed to their agonizing bites. Try to resist sticking your pee-pee down there is what I'm trying to say. That's a pro tip from Gay for May. You can have that one for free. He is primarily red, of course, with 3 sets of dark-colored limbs. The 3 distinct sections of his body are covered with this bumpy skin texture, and he retains a bit of that burgundy accenting on his back and thorax. On his head, you can find some huge blue eyes as well as a little set of horns matching those from his robot mode. I could not even begin to guess what species of ant he is supposed to be, but he does seem to be more heavily inspired by his on-screen appearance in the show than anything. His antenna can wiggle, his mandibles can move, his head's got a little bit of play, his front and back legs can move in and out and up and down respectively, but his middle legs, while they kind of have some side-to-side motion, I think are mainly supposed to remain static. Scorching hot take incoming. I'm kind of glad that his legs aren't extensively articulated. That's always one of my main problems with bug formers, having to pose all of the legs. I have like the spatial awareness of a toddler playing peekaboo. That's too many legs, okay? I can't deal with this. Saying I prefer less articulation might sound like I'm asking for more Transformers that turn into bricks, but consider, most Transformers already turn into bricks. It's just that we don't conceptualize it that way since most of them also have wheels too. Something that seems kind of strange to me is that despite being able to plug into his thorax for flight mode, you can't store Inferno's blaster there in beast mode. This seems like such an obvious thing to do, and for this otherwise smartly designed figure, this is the one foible that bugs me. Cause now I either have to find another place to store it or strap it to his fucking ant back, and that's just not realistic, okay? But disregarding that, Inferno is such an incredibly well-designed and well-made figure that's not only an above-average example of a Transformers toy, but one that perfectly captures the spirit of the character. I imagine many will be picking him up just to complete their Predacon lineup, but even if you're not a Beast Wars fan, you owe it to yourself to check this figure out, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. If you want to see more creepy crawly bug reviews, my infamous Legacy Kickback review is a great place to start. But anyway, that's just my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye-bye. Welcome back to the show, it's Gay for May, and now that Legacy is seeing its stateside release, it's time to start asking the big questions. Is the Transformers community going to be receptive to the new Legacy Prime style figures, which have been designed to dramatically overhaul the fan favorite Prime characters to fit in with a G1 aesthetic? We covered a few very critical early reactions to the reveal a while back, but recently I ran my own poll with my followers and Chromfies, and the overwhelming majority were positive about at least one of the new figures. I was under the impression that these were more controversial, and I guess I was wrong. So now that I have Legacy Prime Universe Bulkhead in hand, it seems it's high time to give my conclusive thoughts on not just the toy itself, but the design philosophy behind it. What do I think about this redesign? And what did I realize about this figure that completely changed the way I looked at him? While Prime Bulkhead's alternate mode is originally a big green SUV, this release instead turns into an armored military truck. Now, Bulkhead as a franchise character is no stranger to having his alt mode changed, but this isn't supposed to be a new version of Bulkhead. It's supposed to be the Prime version having stepped into a vague, multi-dimensional plane of existence. But I don't change my skin color when I step into a church's chicken, so I don't understand why doing this would change Bulkhead's alternate mode. It feels like the designers must have been determined to create something entirely un-Bulkhead, and you just have to wonder why. But ignoring all of that context, is the truck mode any good? Well, they've definitely put more than a little effort into it. There's a lot of intricate paintwork on the cab, from the black lining around the windows to these smaller details such as the wipers, the mirrors, and these little tabs. But the rest of the vehicle is pretty much entirely unpainted. Despite that, this truck is rich with detail. Lots of lines and rivets on the cab. The gas tanks on the sides have caps and straps holding them down, and you can see the struts supporting the loose wrinkled canvas of the canopy from underneath. This is probably unintentional, but because the arms poke up from behind the windows, it kind of looks as if there's two little seats in there, and the feet can be lowered as a ramp leading into the bed of the truck. Between the impressive sculpted details and the other features, this vehicle mode feels a lot more authentic and realistic, closer to a model truck than a typical Transformers toy. I do wish that the canopy wasn't a necessity to complete the vehicle mode though. Well, you can remove it, but doing so exposes his taint and bits. I also think the bed's a little too short, or at least part of the side railing could have extended further up to cover this exposed part of his leg. I believed the transformation would be very simple, but it's actually somewhat involved. The extra complexity in forming the body giving him a bit more pizzazz than if you were to just ape an Optimus style transformation scheme. And I like the clever move of hiding the gas tanks within the legs. It's an easy but effective way of removing unwanted kibble from the robot mode, and I'd love to see similar moves on future Transformers. Legacy Bulkhead's robot mode is where the most contention about the design is. As an adaptation of Prime Bulkhead, this figure only resembles him in the most superficial ways. I think the designers went, oh, he's green, he's got an underbite, that's Bulkhead. But you know who else is green and has an underbite? Crumple Zone. So how do I know you weren't trying to make him and you just failed the assignment spectacularly? Please look forward to my dissertation on how Ransack and Crumple Zone were the original Knockout and Breakdown, available exclusively on Matreon. I'm definitely willing to believe that they made the wrong character. There are basically no details taken from his Prime model. Not to spoil any reviews that may or may not be upcoming, but it definitely appears that the designers went to great lengths to try to preserve the design integrity of one Prime character, but not the other. Hasbro obviously creates figures with the intention to make multiple different toys out of them, but by neglecting to include the things that make Bulkhead Bulkhead, they've presented us with someone incredibly generic looking. And in a weird way, this almost makes Bulkhead seem as if he's the retool, and that this mold is really meant for another character. It makes me wonder whether they should have made a different character first, with Bulkhead being relegated to a retailer exclusive instead, or released further down the main line. But that isn't to say that there aren't merits to this figure. He's shockingly posable, his arms have an over 90-degree bend to them, his head's got good range, and his enormous feet help him stay standing even in the most extreme poses. A lot of interesting details were revealed, such as these riveted plates that ground him to his armored military alternate mode, and it's also pretty cool how his color palette shifts, going from lime green and olive green to lime green and silver. I was expecting to be fairly disappointed by his proportions, but the pictures did a bad job of portraying him accurately. His arms aren't quite as thin as I thought they were. His legs aren't quite as long as they originally seemed. He looks pretty good next to deluxe figures, but man, I wish he was bigger. Basically double dealer's size. They definitely could have used some of that extra money from a leader class budget to fill in the hollow cavern in his chest. It's a nice discreet place if you need to store your weed, I suppose, or some nuts. But I can practically stick my whole finger in there too. I wonder what else I could stick in there. Bulkhead also features a nice little set of weapons. Bulkhead's classic wrecking ball, made to crack those nuts that I mentioned earlier, as well as an Energon minigun that can be handheld or mounted over his shoulder. Listen, we're all thinking it, but I'm not going to be the guy who gets in trouble for saying it. And you can also remove the truck canopy and use it as a shield. It's cool because it reminds me of a big Gundam shield, but I prefer leaving it attached to his back where it's out of the way. So on one hand, they've really missed the mark for making him look like the Prime character. But I think Bulkhead's pretty solid otherwise, and there's nothing that annoys me in particular. And honestly, I think you could headcanon this figure solely as a G1 Bulkhead and remove the Prime element entirely. But then I saw through Hasbro's great lie. The vehicle mode, the big truck cab for a chest, the placement of the colors, the slope of his shoulders, the look of his feet. The scales fell from my eyes and it became so clear. Obviously he isn't Prime Bulkhead, and he isn't even G1 Bulkhead. He's actually animated Bulkhead. Now listen, I know I'm a huge animated mark, and us animated fans are absolutely starving at this point. I would literally sell my cat's kidneys if it meant I could get new animated figures. All I'm saying is that based on my expert analysis of this figure, Legacy Bulkhead shares closer similarities with the animated incarnation of Bulkhead, and that potentially they could have easily sold this toy as a more faithful translation of that character rather than the Prime version. So why did they try to sell everybody on this being an interpretation of Prime Bulkhead when the fan base can clearly see that it doesn't actually resemble Prime Bulkhead at all? I definitely believe that the potential controversy was a calculated factor in this guy's release. Plus, it makes sense that Legacy Bulkhead was created to commemorate Prime's recent 10th anniversary, so any similarities to other Bulkheads that I'm seeing is probably mostly coincidental. But imagine if they took this figure and gave him animated Bulkhead's armored cab. With the thin black windshield and the large sloping green roof, it would have made him look a lot more visually dynamic than the blocky Gundam cosplay we see him in here, although the proportions still wouldn't be quite right, and he would be missing other key details like the clawed hands. But this is all wishful thinking on my part, and it's kind of unfair to wax poetic on what a figure could be rather than objectively discussing what it is. And I don't dislike Legacy Bulkhead. On the contrary, I actually enjoy him. It surprised me and impressed me with its engineering. He's a lot of fun because he has different weapon options, and having him in hand is a way different experience than seeing him in photos, because I thought I understood everything about this figure before I had him, and I was wrong. So much like ordering a foreign bride from a shady darknet website, there's a big difference between what you see on the screen and what you actually get. And with Bulkhead, you get a decent Transformer. One that's not quite what people had hoped for, but I think it's one that deserves a chance at a spot in your collection. But anyway, that's just my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye-bye. Welcome back to the show, it's Gay4Me, and we're at it again with the Legacy reviews. Today we'll be taking a look at the by-the-books babe from the KCPD, Strongarm. Is this precocious policewoman a paragon of perfection, or just another Legacy letdown? Strongarm first appeared in Transformers Robots in Disguise. No, the other one. No, the other one. Motherfucker! While training under the legendary Bumblebee, the young police cadet followed him to Earth with the delinquent Autobot Sideswipe in tow. There, the trio embark on a mysterious new mission, received from the late Optimus Prime hisself.
Bumblebee.
Optimus, I thought you were dead.
I am. Now you must go to Earth and delete my browser history before the Decepticons get their hands on my Conda.com password.
Optimus, what the f***? Strongarm's vehicle mode is a white and blue police SUV. It's quite accurate to the show, possibly the most accurate vehicle mode of any AU Transformer brought to Legacy thus far, which is astonishing since Strongarm is actually heavily retooled from Legacy Elita, turning that sweet bubblegum car into this blocky SUV. It's broad and boxy, which helps it fit in amongst G1 style figures, but is honed to a modern edge, thanks to the more intricate geometry and detailing. It generally seems like they put a lot of care into creating this vehicle mode, especially in regards to the paint. The figure in general is well painted, but the vehicle mode captures all these intricate lines and variations in hue. The only major details missing are the painted lights in the front and the Autobot badge that she proudly displays on her grille. They also use the same smooth racing tires from the original mold, when she should have these big, thick, treaded tires to match her big, thick ass. Speaking of, in robot mode, Strongarm is also shockingly accurate to her original appearance. Major retooling has been done to the upper body of the mold to give her a stockier figure, but that Elita-One DNA still comes through to maintain an appealing feminine shape. Yeah, I got some DNA for her too. It's interesting to note that Elita's chunky legs and feet heavily resembled Strongarm's from the get-go, so they've definitely been planning this retool since the beginning. Unfortunately, despite being remolded from the cutest Transformer ever, Strongarm faced some heavy backlash from many fans over her appearance, so I'd like to take this time to address a few common criticisms of this figure. The first thing many people criticized her for was the head sculpt. It looked comically oversized for her body, with these absurdly wide blue fish lips. Now, she does kind of have a fish face, but the head itself isn't really any bigger than Elita's head and appears much more proportionate in person. More specifically, her face is not particularly flattering, which is a major letdown considering how pretty Elita-One was. Oh my god, is Gay4Me shaming a fembot for her appearance? I am. I mean, look at how big her chin and jawline is. What is she, a pre-tool for animated Sentinel Prime? It's a double shame because the head would be really good if she didn't look like a lost Bogdanov. It has a lot of finely painted details like her chevron or the thin multicolored stripes and blue recesses on her head fins. All the new sculpting and paint ops can't be cheap, so I get the sense that this must have been a more expensive retool than most. Another common criticism for this figure had to do with the physical size of her robot mode. The Elita mold seemed too small to properly portray this mega muscle mommy, but I feel like this criticism was based off of a weird mythology that sprung up around the character. Strongarm is actually a relatively normal sized bot. She just has lots of bulky kibble because of her oversized oversized vehicle mode. In the show, she's a little shorter than Bumblebee and Sideswipe, and this figure reflects that pretty faithfully. However, a different problem arises thanks to the petiteness of the figure. The upper body of the mold wasn't designed with all of this extra kibble in mind. Her lower arms bang up against her shoulders bang up against her head and backpack, and these fenders can easily block her face while posing her, so it can feel a bit claustrophobic to play with her. Thankfully, the fenders articulate to help combat these issues, but I'm kinda mad that they designed Strong Arm like this. Not only because it's more annoying to play with, but because it just makes Minerva less accurate ex post facto, since she's supposed to have fenders on her shoulders too. Now, as a police officer, Strong Arm utilizes a few different tools throughout the series, like handcuffs and even a baton, but in real life, law enforcement is constantly scrutinized over the equipment and tactics they use, and I think that's unfair. Not all cops are bad. My grandpa was a cop, but he voted for Obama. But it might be a bit inappropriate to give the policewoman an accessory with too much political baggage associated with it. So Hasbro went with the safe option and just gave her a gun. It's very accurate to the little standard issue pea shooter she and Bumblebee carry in the series, while being a lot more intimidating than the pathetic sidearms they like to give RC. But it's a bit of a letdown that Strong Arm only gets one weapon when Elita and Minerva both came with two big ones. I assume these blasters were a part of the mold, but then Medics featured a newly colored set of them inexplicably, so now I don't really know what to think. It's rather fitting to put these two together though. Since Medics is based on the Rescue Bots character, they're kind of from the same universe. Good old aligned continuity, completely arresting the franchise for a few years, back in 2010. Man, Strong Arm better not try to arrest me, cause I'll pull out my little pea shooter when I'm in the back seat, and I'll show her the true meaning of beat it like a cop. That's really bad. I shouldn't put that in the video. Anyway, I like Legacy Strong Arm. She's an impressive variation on a good mold, managing to convincingly overhaul said mold into a nearly perfect portrayal of herself, updating the character with a modern Legacy aesthetic, but without losing her distinct identity. But where this figure fails Strong Arm somewhat is in the minutia. There's a few questionable choices that either make the figure too hard to play with or make me too soft to play with. I think it's a serviceable replacement for the original figure, but one that still leaves much room for improvement. If you missed out on our first anniversary video celebrating 2 years of the Gay for May show, you can check that out right here. But anyway, that's just my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye-bye. Welcome back to the show. It's Gay for May, and today we're celebrating the first anniversary of the Gay for May show. But Gay for May, haven't you been making reviews for 2 years? Well, it's the first year we're celebrating it. And to commemorate such a monumental event, we're gonna review the buzzworthy Bumblebee Troop Builder Multi-Pack, a set of 4 brand new repaints to supercharge your shelves without breaking the bank. But Gay for May, you could barely review 1 figure a month. How will you review 4? Watch me, bitch. First up is the Animated Universe Autotrooper, who is easily the most anticipated figure in this set, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, its new animated rep, following Legacy Prowl's release earlier this year. You can check out that review after this one. And secondly, there aren't usually any troop builders offered for Autobots. Decepticons always get Seekers or Viacons, so it's a nice change of pace. Since the Autotroopers and Animated shared a body style with Ironhide, this figure has been repainted from the Siege Ironhide mold, which makes me happy since it's my favorite of the Siege Deluxes. He's perfectly chunky, the transformation is fun and straightforward, and the vehicle mode is a literal brick on wheels. I'm gonna throw him at a politician next time I'm in DC. But we all know what we're really here to talk about. 3 out of the 4 figures in this set include an alternate head, and with the Autotrooper, you just need to take his faceplate off, which reveals an inner skull piece that the alternate head slots onto. This cool new feature was conceptualized by veteran Takara designer Shogo Hasui-san, and I sure hope this dude got a raise and a PP suck for this idea. He deserves it. The super blocky alternate head is inspired by the original Autotrooper from the often maligned Kiss Player series, the Japanese G1 interquel where the Transformers get powered up by kissing adorable young women. Now, I know how that sounds, but listen, if Windblade came up to me and said, "Gay for May, I need your human penis to defeat the Decepticons," I would have said, yeah, that makes sense. So we literally got a Kiss Players figure in Legacy before Studio Series Hound was released. Marcus Mayer had total deniability had he chosen to not include this head in this set, given the fandom's open distaste for the series. But when we're talking obscure lore references, he just can't help himself. Listen to how happy he sounds.
Yes, it's like, oh man, we're digging deep.
Yeah, we are digging deep here.
Other than that, the only accessory Autotrooper includes is this weird rocket launcher / hammer weapon. It's nifty, and having 2 weapons in one offers more customization options for those with multiple copies of the figure. It's also a big step up from the original Autotrooper, whose weapon was just a bunch of traffic cones stacked up on each other. What? So between pioneering new technology and finally giving the Autobots the much needed battle power they need to match the Decepticon droves, this figure's kind of a big deal. I love this mold, I love seeing Animated come back in such a big way, and as the only good guy in this set, I couldn't think of a more worthy inclusion. One single cunning crusader standing against a gallery of dastardly villains.
One man! Alone! Stop saying that! Betrayed by the country he loves. My goodness.
Next up, we have the G2 Universe Cybertronian Trooper. This figure is also kind of a big deal. Everyone knows G2 as the toy line that looks like an acid trip come to life, but fewer people have read the accompanying G2 comic series. It introduces non-toy characters like G-Axis and his army of second-generation Decepticons, who are hell-bent on conquering the universe and destroying both the Autobots and the original Decepticons. The G2 Trooper is a remold of Legacy Skullgrin, adding a new chest and 2 new heads based off the many foot soldiers making up G-Axis's army. Like Auto Trooper, the heads are more easily swappable thanks to the skull system, and the horns can also be moved around and mixed up between the heads. Legacy Skullgrin was one of the figures I regret not making a video about, and I'm glad they reused it, because it's really cool. The robot mode has this hulking, stocky frame with these big stooped shoulders and is adorned with small bony protrusions, giving it a savage edge. He's even got a little skull encrusted on his pee-pee. The transformation is fun and surprisingly a lot more involved than the vehicle mode deserves. It looks alright, but it's a figurative brick with no wheels. How am I supposed to roll him over my sister's titties if he doesn't have any wheels? There's also a huge ugly hole in the side that goes straight through the chassis. You can kind of cover it up with his swords, but it mostly makes the tank look like it has shitty little wings now. They're based off of G1 Skullgrin's original accessories, fusing his blasters and his bony scimitar together into what I can only describe as a bionicle weapon. And while it's rather efficient that they can be used as either swords or blasters, they did the thing I hate where they put paint on the handle of the weapon. It's just gonna scrape off after some extended use. The paint in general is my least favorite thing about this figure. Compared to Skullgrin, he has much fewer and simpler paint applications, which, okay, he's one of 4 in a budget gift set. They have to cut costs somewhere, but I wonder if those cuts were in the quality of the paint too. The gray on the Trooper seems off, like it feels rougher and chalkier than the greens and whites they used. As far as I can tell, the rest of the figures all have the same consistency of paint, so I'm not sure why this color would be any different. The G2 Trooper is just about everything I would have asked for in a G2 Trooper. They picked a decent mold, and although it's still a budding faction with limited members, including the 2 heads gets a lot of mileage out of this one figure. I hope he's popular enough to convince Hasbro to do more from this series, like maybe a G2 Flyer out of Kingdom Cyclonus. This is a $1 million idea, and I'm literally giving it to them for free. Our third of the set is the Quintesson Bailiff, and there is a shockingly interesting history behind this figure. He is a straight repaint of a previously retooled Quintesson Bailiff, found in the Pit of Judgment multipack, but in that set, the Bailiff had this very inaccurate brown and pea green color scheme, as opposed to the more standard Alicon palette. Apparently, Hasbro had referred to an oversaturated picture of the character taken from the wiki page as the basis of that older figure's color scheme. Now, I love our Transformers team. They have a lot of genuine love for this franchise, which is more than I could say about some of the other teams at Hasbro.
Heaps of original action.
And I know we all rely on the wiki, even me. But fucking Googling shit and going, well, it's on the wiki, it must be right, is not how you should conduct research for your $1 million toy franchise. Oversights like this are such a common occurrence nowadays that there is an entire wiki page cataloging the mistakes resulting from Hasbro's poor research. Now that's funny. Anyway, this guy's pretty badass. I like his colors a lot, especially the metallic blue accenting around his neck and on his forearms. There's quite a few beefy fellas in this set, isn't there? Should have called this the Mass Builder multi-pack. Wait, that's a game? And it's not a Pierce Brosnan simulator? He also features an interchangeable head, the other being the original head from the Earthrise Alicon figure. Unfortunately, these heads do not have that new inner skull piece, so you have to pull the entire thing off the ball joint to swap them. It's a bit scary to replace the Bailiff head too. It seems like it would be really easy to break off the horns or prick yourself on them. I like his weapons too. His main one is a combination axe / spear / mace, and it's got a really funky design with this cool textured grip on the top of the handle. It splits in the middle to slide into his fists, and he can actually hold it with 2 hands despite the limited arm articulation. Or he can dual wield the pieces. He also comes with a small curved cutlass that hides in his tail. This dude is straight up barbaric. His beast mode is this absolutely monstrous looking Alicon with crazy proportions, a thick sloping body, and humongous crunching jaw, but teeny tiny T-Rex arms. He can still hold his weapons like this too. I'd say there's a certain exaggerated charm to it, out here with his fucking reptar looking ass. He's like a little kaiju or a Power Rangers villain. I can imagine him in the middle of a big field getting his cloaca caved in by 5 teenagers with attitude. At least it wasn't 5 I'd say the Bailiff is my biggest surprise of this set. He was far from the one I was most excited about, but he has become the one that I find myself enjoying way more than I was expecting to. And with the Quintessons becoming their own cozy sub-faction in recent years, especially with their early appearance in the new Energon comic series, I'm glad to add more of these little freaks to my collection. Finally, we have this generic Seeker, and since we've already talked about this mold in my Studio Series Starscream review, we're not going to get too deep into him. Truthfully, I can't imagine that this guy is going to top anybody's best of the year lists. He's easily the least interesting part of this set. A lot of people already don't like this mold. He really just looks like an off-color Thundercracker, and he's the only figure to not include an alternate head. A cone head could have done wonders for this guy and helped him look a lot more distinctive, even if it were the only head that he came with. Of the 4 figures in my set, he is also the one with noticeably the worst quality too. Some of the molding looks sloppy, the details are a bit gummy, and there are a lot of loose joints. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that we should always insist on top quality from Hasbro, but the set itself only costs $78 retail, which is about the price of just the 3 deluxes. So essentially getting a free Voyager 2 makes me kind of willing to overlook some shoddiness, especially since he's mostly meant to stand around and fill out the ranks on a shelf. Like I said before, the Decepticons tend to get the lion's share of army builders anyway, so while I could think of a few other figures that might have taken his place, I don't mind getting just a basic Seeker, if it means the other figures get a chance to shine a little brighter. And if you happen to miss out on the Earthrise Seeker 2-pack, he could convincingly take Thundercracker's place. Or it could be the first official Go 1 figure. But imagine if they'd gotten crazy and finally given us an Earthrise Slipstream or Sandstorm instead. That could have made this figure a real winner and would have been a more worthwhile way to round out this set in my opinion. So in conclusion, I think this set is pretty cool. It's like a BotCon set you could buy at Target. Not only does it feature several deep cut characters with different customization options, it's quite thrifty by modern pricing standards. Though I do have some concerns with the effort and quality of the set. When faced with the price and function of it, I don't find myself as worried about the condition of the individual figures. I think it's definitely worth buying, at least once. And now that we know nothing is off limits, I think I know who needs to be in the next pack. Thank you to all my piglets for sticking with me these last 2 years. Thank you for helping me reach 10,000 subscribers, as well as 1,000 subs on my second channel. I really appreciate the support, and I will continue to try to make great videos for everyone to enjoy. But anyway, that's just my opinions. Please leave yours in the comments below. Bye-bye.